The cold Kentucky air carried the distant rumble of engines across Fort Knox. 72-year-old retired Colonel James Harmon stood motionless at the edge of the observation platform. His weathered hands gripped the railing as a formation of M1A2 Abrams tanks maneuvered across the training grounds below. Their massive forms moved with surprising grace despite weighing over 70 tons each. The morning sun glinted off their angular hulls as they executed a perfect echelon formation. A younger officer might have seen only raw power in the display. Harmon saw vulnerabilities. His gaze remained fixed even as footsteps approached from behind. The distinctive cadence told him who it was before the man spoke. General William Parker halted beside him. At 63, Parker commanded the Army Armor Center with the same precision he once commanded tanks in Desert Storm. The two men watched in silence for several moments before Parker spoke. "Still looking for flaws in my tanks, Jim?" A faint smile crossed Harmon's face. "Old habits." Below them, the lead Abrams executed a sharp turn, kicking up clouds of dust that momentarily obscured the formation. When it cleared, the tanks had seamlessly transitioned to a wedge formation. "Your boys train well," Harmon said. Parker nodded. "Best in the world." He paused. "But that might not be enough anymore." Harmon turned slightly. His piercing blue eyes, still sharp despite his age, studied Parker's expression. He saw concern etched in the lines of the general's face. "You didn't invite me here to critique your training program." "No." Parker's voice lowered. "I need you for something bigger. Something that requires your particular experience." Harmon had known William Parker for 30 years. They had served together in the Gulf. He recognized the gravity in the man's tone. "Must be serious if you're dragging me out of retirement." Parker surveyed the area to ensure they were alone before responding. "Pentagon's panicking. New intel just came in." He gestured toward the administration building. "Not here. Come with me." The hallways of the command center buzzed with activity as junior officers and staff navigated the corridors with purposeful strides. Many nodded respectfully as Harmon passed. His reputation preceded him. The legendary tank commander from Korea. The man who had faced down Soviet T-34s and lived to tell about it. Few of these young officers had ever faced enemy armor in combat. Fewer still understood what it meant to be outgunned and outnumbered. Harmon had lived it. Parker led him past the standard briefing rooms to a secure door at the end of the hallway. He pressed his palm against the scanner, and the heavy door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Inside, the temperature dropped several degrees. The windowless room contained a large conference table surrounded by high-backed chairs. On the far wall, digital displays showed satellite imagery of unfamiliar terrain. In the center of the table sat a detailed scale model of what appeared to be an experimental tank design. The door sealed shut behind them with a soft click. "Take a seat, Jim." Parker gestured to the chair at the head of the table. Harmon approached slowly, his attention fixed on the model. Its sleek design looked nothing like the Abrams tanks outside. The turret profile was dramatically lower. The whole configuration suggested a radical departure from conventional Western tank design philosophy. "What am I looking at, Will?" Parker activated a wall screen with a remote. "The future, or at least what the Pentagon thinks the future should be. The XM-1A, Next Generation Main Battle Tank." Harmon circled the table, studying the model from various angles. Something about the design troubled him. "Looks impressive on the outside," he said finally. "What's under the hood?" "That's why you're here." Parker pressed another button. The screens around the room came to life, displaying technical specifications and test data. The XM-1A program is in trouble. 3 years of development, billions in R&D, and we're still facing fundamental design flaws. Harmon scanned the displays. The numbers told a grim story. Excessive weight, limited operational range, maintenance nightmares. "You've built a beautiful coffin," he said. "Our enemies would love to face this in battle." Parker nodded grimly. "That's exactly what I told the Joint Chiefs. But there's more." He lowered his voice. "Intelligence reports indicate Russia and China have formed a partnership to develop a new generation of battle tanks. Early prototypes have already been tested in Syria and Ukraine. And they're taking a completely different approach. Their design philosophy seems to be returning to fundamentals rather than piling on more technology and armor." Parker touched the screen, bringing up a blurry satellite image. This was captured 6 months ago at a testing facility in Siberia. Harmon leaned forward. The image showed a tank with a distinctly different profile than anything in the current Russian arsenal. Something about it stirred an old memory. "The profile reminds me of something," he said slowly. Parker nodded. That's exactly what our analysts at that said. They believe the Russians and Chinese are drawing inspiration from the T-34. The name hung in the air between them. For most modern military planners, the T-34 was an historical footnote, a World War II relic. For James Harmon, it was something else entirely. It was the tank that had nearly killed him in Korea. Why would they look backward, he asked, though he already suspected the answer. Parker's expression was grave, because sometimes the past holds lessons we've forgotten. The T-34 wasn't just a good tank for its era. It represented a design philosophy that emphasized the perfect balance of firepower, protection, and mobility. Our intelligence suggests they're applying those principles with modern technology. Harmon closed his eyes briefly. The cold interior of the briefing room faded away. In its place came the biting winter wind of the Korean peninsula, the sound of tracks on frozen ground, the distinctive engine note of approaching T-34s. He opened his eyes. "What do you want from me, Will?" "I've been authorized to assemble a special team to evaluate our current design approach. We're calling it Project Thunder." Parker gestured to the model. "I want you to lead it." Harmon laughed without humor. "I'm 72 years old. What makes you think I have anything to offer your engineers and weapons designers?" "Because you've faced the enemy we're trying to learn from. You've been inside captured T-34s. You've studied them firsthand. And most importantly," Parker paused, "you understand that tank warfare isn't just about technology. It's about principles." Harmon moved to the window overlooking the training grounds. The Abrams tanks were now lined up in perfect formation, their crews standing at attention beside them for inspection. "I've been retired for 15 years, Will. The Army's moved on without me." "Has it?" Parker stepped closer. "Look at those tanks out there. 70 tons each. Guzzle fuel like there's an unlimited supply in combat. Digital systems that can be hacked or jammed. We've added layers of complexity without questioning the fundamental approach." He placed a hand on Harmon's shoulder. "The Pentagon has assembled some of the brightest minds in the country. Engineers, tacticians, material scientists, but they're missing something crucial." "And what's that?" "Experience. Real combat experience against the very design philosophy that's now coming back to haunt us." Parker's voice grew more intense. "You've looked into the barrel of a T-34's gun and lived to tell about it. You understand what makes a truly effective tank in ways no computer simulation can replicate." Harmon remained silent, his thoughts drifting back 7 decades to the frozen hills of Korea. The memories never truly faded. "I need someone who can bridge the gap between theoretical design and battlefield reality," Parker continued. "Someone the engineers will listen to because he's been there." Harmon turned from the window. "You have active duty officers with combat experience. Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan." "Against what?" Parker challenged. "Insurgents with IEDs and RPGs? Soviet-era export models operated by poorly trained crews? None of them have faced what you faced in Korea. None of them have encountered a true peer-level armored threat." The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the ventilation system. Harmon's gaze drifted back to the model on the table. Something about its proportions bothered him on an instinctive level he couldn't immediately articulate. 3 months, Parker said. "That's all I'm asking. Help us understand what we're missing. Help us build a tank that won't get our boys killed because we've forgotten fundamental lessons." Harmon's expression remained unreadable. "Who else is on this team of yours?" Parker smiled slightly, sensing the tide turning. "I'll introduce you to them tomorrow. But I can tell you they're the best in their fields. Experts who question conventional wisdom. People who won't be intimidated by Pentagon bureaucracy. And they report to me directly. You'll have full authority over the project. I've secured approval from the Secretary of Defense himself." Harmon approached the model again, studying its lines with a critical eye. "This design is fundamentally flawed," he said finally. "It prioritizes protection at the expense of everything else. It's repeating the same mistakes the Germans made with their Tiger tanks." A brief smile crossed Parker's face. "And that's exactly why I need you, Jim. You see it immediately while our designers have been blind to it." Harmon nodded slowly. "I'll need access to everything. Test data, design specifications, intelligence reports, no restrictions. You'll have it. And I'll need to see a T-34 up close again. A real one, not just photos or specifications." Parker raised an eyebrow. "The Armor Museum has 2 of them in the collection." "Good." Harmon straightened his shoulders, decision made. "I'll need quarters on base." "Already arranged." Parker extended his hand. "Welcome back to active duty, Colonel Harmon." As they shook hands, the door to the conference room opened. A junior officer entered with a tablet in hand. Sorry to interrupt, General, but you asked to be notified immediately. Parker took the tablet, scanned the contents, and his expression darkened. What is it? Harmon asked. Intelligence update from the DNI. The Chinese just completed their first successful field test of their new tank prototype, codenamed Dragon Scale. Parker handed the tablet to Harmon. They're ahead of schedule. The tablet displayed thermal imaging of a tank crossing rugged terrain at high speed. Its profile was distinctly different from anything in the current Chinese inventory. Lower, more angled. The movement reminded Harmon of something he'd seen decades ago. How far along is our XM-1A program, he asked. Final design phase. We're scheduled to begin production of prototypes in 6 months. Harmon handed back the tablet. Too slow. If this intelligence is accurate, we're already behind. Which is why we need Project Thunder to succeed, and quickly. Parker gestured to the door. Let's get you settled. Tomorrow you meet your team. The senior officers' quarters at Fort Knox had changed little since Harmon had last stayed there 15 years earlier. The furnishings were utilitarian but comfortable. A desk, a bed, a small sitting area. The walls were adorned with framed photographs of historical armor formations and famous tank battles. Harmon stood at the window watching the evening descend over the base. Lights came on across the training grounds as day shifted to night. In the distance, he could make out the silhouettes of tanks returning from field exercises. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. The years had taken their toll. White hair, deepening lines around his eyes and mouth. But those eyes still held the same intensity they had when he was a young lieutenant facing his first battle. The knock at his door came precisely at 1900 hours. Military punctuality never changed. Enter! A young captain opened the door, standing at attention. Colonel Harmon, sir, General Parker asked me to provide you with these files. He held out a digital tablet. Harmon accepted it with a nod. Thank you, Captain. Sir, if I may. The young officer hesitated. It's an honor to meet you. My grandfather served in Korea, 7th Infantry Division. He told me stories about the tank commanders who saved their positions during the Chinese offensive. Harmon's expression softened slightly. What's your name, son? Rodriguez, sir. David Rodriguez. I'm a tank commander myself. M1A2 Abrams. You've seen combat, Captain Rodriguez? Yes, sir. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. Harmon studied him. Ever face enemy armor? A flash of understanding crossed Rodriguez's face. No, sir. Mostly IEDs and RPGs. Consider yourself fortunate. Harmon gestured to the tablet. What's on this? Project Thunder briefing materials, sir. Dossiers on your team members. Intelligence reports on Russian and Chinese armor development. Historical analysis of Soviet tank design philosophy from World War II through the Cold War. Harmon nodded. Thank you, Captain. Rodriguez hesitated again. Sir, General Parker mentioned you might need an aide during your stay. I've been assigned to assist you if required. The older man considered this for a moment. You're a tank commander. Shouldn't you be with your unit? My crew is currently assigned to training duties, sir. General Parker thought my combat experience might be useful to Project Thunder. Harmon sensed there was more to this assignment than Parker had revealed, but he decided not to press the issue. Very well, Captain. I'll likely need your assistance tomorrow when I meet the team. 0800 hours at Building 216, sir. I'll be there at 0730 to escort you. Rodriguez saluted crisply and departed, closing the door behind him. Alone again, Harmon activated the tablet. The screen illuminated with a series of classified folders. He opened the first one, labeled Project Thunder Personnel. 4 faces appeared on the screen, each accompanied by an extensive biography and security clearance information. Dr. Emily Chen, 42 years old, MIT-educated mechanical engineer specializing in armored vehicle design. Former lead engineer for BAE Systems. Multiple patents in composite armor technology and vehicle suspension systems. Notations in her file indicated a brilliant but difficult personality. Resistant to authority. Prone to challenging conventional wisdom. Harmon nodded appreciatively. Parker hadn't been looking for yes men. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Williams, 45. West Point. Combat experience in Desert Storm and Iraq. Doctoral degree in military history with emphasis on armored warfare. Currently serving as tactical instructor at the Armor School. His file noted a conservative approach to doctrine and resistance to radical design changes. A traditionalist, Harmon thought. Someone who would challenge new ideas from a position of doctrinal orthodoxy, a necessary counterbalance. The third dossier belonged to Captain David Rodriguez, the young officer who had just left. His combat record was impressive for his age. Distinguished Service Cross for actions in Fallujah. But what caught Harmon's attention was a note near the end of his file. Grandfather, Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, 7th Infantry Division, awarded Silver Star for actions at Chosin Reservoir, December 1950. Chosin. The name alone was enough to transport Harmon back to that frozen hell. The brutal cold, the overwhelming Chinese forces, and the T-34 tanks that had nearly broken through American lines before being stopped by a desperate defense. The final dossier belonged to Dr. Robert Kaufman, 65 years old, military historian specializing in Soviet and German armored warfare development, author of numerous books on tank warfare, including Steel Giants, the T-34, and the Evolution of Armored Warfare, former advisor to NATO on Soviet armor capabilities during the Cold War. An interesting team, a mix of technical expertise, tactical experience, historical knowledge, and fresh perspective. Parker had chosen well. Harmon opened the next folder, labeled Russian-Chinese Joint Armor Development. The intelligence reports confirmed what Parker had told him. Extensive cooperation between Russian and Chinese military engineers on a new generation of main battle tanks. Prototype testing in remote locations. Unusual design characteristics that suggested a return to fundamental principles rather than an emphasis on technology. One report included a comparative analysis of the new design against historical Soviet tanks. The conclusion was highlighted. Dragon-scale prototype demonstrates a design philosophy more closely aligned with T-34-85 than with modern Russian designs like the T-90 or T-14 Armata. Harmon's brow furrowed. Why would two of the world's most advanced military powers look backward for inspiration? What had they recognized that Western designers had missed? He switched to the historical analysis folder. The first document was a comprehensive study of the T-34's impact on armored warfare. He skimmed through it, already familiar with most of the content. The revolutionary sloped armor, the perfect balance between firepower, protection, and mobility, the simplicity of maintenance and operation under battlefield conditions. But one paragraph caught his attention. Perhaps the most significant yet overlooked aspect of the T-34's design was its adherence to fundamental principles rather than technological superiority. While German tank development emphasized increasingly complex and specialized designs, Tiger, Panther, the Soviets maintained focus on a balanced approach that prioritized battlefield effectiveness over technical perfection. This philosophy enabled mass production, simplified logistics, and adaptability to varying combat conditions. Modern Western tank design has increasingly followed the German rather than Soviet model, raising questions about long-term battlefield effectiveness. Harmon sat back, considering the implications. Had American tank design gone down the wrong path? Had the pursuit of technological superiority led to a fundamental imbalance in design philosophy? He picked up the tablet again and opened the final folder, labeled XM1A Development History. The contents told a troubling story, year after year of design changes. Escalating weight as additional systems and armor were integrated, increasingly complex electronics and fire control systems, ballooning costs. One internal assessment was particularly damning. Current XM1A prototype exceeds weight parameters by 18%. Operational range falls 32% below requirements due to fuel consumption. Maintenance requirements exceed field capabilities. Digital systems' vulnerability to electronic warfare not adequately addressed. The conclusion was stark. The XM1A program was creating a tank that would be too heavy, too complex, and too maintenance-intensive for actual combat conditions. It was following the same path as the German Tiger tank of World War II, rather than learning from the T-34's balanced design. Harmon set the tablet down and moved to the window again. Night had fallen completely now. The base was illuminated by evenly spaced lights that created pools of brightness in the darkness. His mind drifted back to Korea. December 1950, the bitter cold of the Chosin Reservoir. His M26 Pershing tank facing down advancing T-34s. The shock of discovering that many of their rounds simply bounced off the Soviet tank's sloped armor. The desperate tactics they had developed to compensate for their technical disadvantage. They had prevailed then through superior training, tactics, and air support rather than better equipment. American tanks didn't achieve clear technical superiority until the introduction of the M1 Abrams in the 1980s. But now the wheel was turning again. The Russians and Chinese had recognized something fundamental that American designers had forgotten. They were returning to first principles, while the Pentagon pursued ever more complex and costly solutions. Harmon's reflections stared back at him from the darkened window, the face of a man who had seen war up close, who had learned his harsh lessons through experience rather than theory. Tomorrow he would meet the team that might help America rediscover what it had forgotten. The fundamental principles that made a tank not just technologically impressive, but effective in combat. He turned from the window, suddenly feeling the weight of his years, but with that weight came the wisdom of experience. And perhaps that was exactly what Project Thunder needed most. The morning briefing room in Building 216 hummed with nervous energy. The four members of Project Thunder had arrived early, arranging their materials and exchanging cautious introductions. None of them fully understood why they had been selected or what their assignment would entail. The classified nature of the project had limited their preparation. Dr. Emily Chen adjusted her presentation slides for the third time. Her reputation for perfectionism was well earned. At 42, she had become one of the most respected vehicle engineers in the defense industry, despite persistent resistance to her more innovative ideas. Her sleek black hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her posture radiated confidence born of intellectual superiority. Across the table, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Williams reviewed his notes with methodical precision. His close-cropped hair and ramrod straight posture marked him as career military even without the uniform. He had spent 15 years studying and teaching armored warfare doctrine. His published papers on tactical evolution were required reading at West Point. Dr. Robert Kaufman, Kaufman, the oldest civilian member of the team, seemed the most relaxed. His decades studying tank warfare had given him a philosophical perspective on the proceedings. He sipped coffee from a Fort Knox mug, occasionally glancing at the door. Captain David Rodriguez stood near the entrance, checking his watch frequently. He had escorted Colonel Harmon from his quarters to the building, but the older man had asked for a few moments alone before entering the briefing room. "He's late," Chen observed, checking the wall clock. It was 08:03. Williams shook his head. "Colonel Harmon is never late. We're early." The door opened precisely as he finished speaking. General Parker entered first, followed by a tall, white-haired man whose bearing instantly commanded attention despite his age. James Harmon moved with the deliberate grace of someone accustomed to leadership. His piercing blue eyes scanned the room, making brief but evaluating contact with each team member. Everyone stood immediately. "Good morning," Parker said. "Please be seated." As they complied, Rodriguez took position near the wall rather than at the table. Harmon noticed this but said nothing. "I'll keep this brief," Parker continued. "You've all been selected for Project Thunder because you represent the best thinking in your respective fields. You've also been chosen because you question conventional wisdom." He gestured toward Harmon. "Colonel James Harmon will be leading this project. His combat experience and first-hand knowledge of the subject matter are unparalleled." Williams raised an eyebrow slightly. Chen's expression remained neutral, but her body language suggested skepticism. Parker continued, "I'll let Colonel Harmon explain the details of your assignment. You all have the highest security clearance, so speak freely within this team. Nothing discussed leaves this room without express authorization." He nodded to Harmon. "They're all yours, Colonel." As Parker departed, Harmon moved to the head of the table. He remained standing, studying each face before speaking. "The United States Army has a problem," he began, his voice carrying the gravitas of experience. "We've spent billions developing the next-generation main battle tank, and we're heading in the wrong direction." He activated the room's main display screen, showing an image of the XM-1A prototype. This vehicle represents the culmination of decades of American tank design philosophy. It incorporates cutting-edge technology, unprecedented protection, and firepower that can engage targets beyond visual range. He paused. "And it will fail on the battlefield." Chen shifted uncomfortably. Williams frowned. "Strong statement, Colonel," Kaufman commented mildly. Harmon nodded. "Based on evidence, not opinion." He changed the display to show a satellite image. This was captured 6 months ago at a testing facility in eastern Russia. Our intelligence indicates it's a joint Russian-Chinese prototype, codenamed Dragon Scale. The image showed a tank with distinctive features unlike current-generation Russian or Chinese models. The profile was lower, the angles more pronounced. Initial analysis suggests this design is achieving superior mobility, comparable protection, and equivalent firepower to our XM-1A at approximately 60% of the weight. Chen leaned forward, suddenly interested. That's not possible with current technology. It is if you're willing to reconsider fundamental assumptions. Harmon changed the display again, this time showing a T-34-85 from 1944. The Russians and Chinese appear to be drawing inspiration from what worked 7 decades ago. Williams couldn't contain his skepticism. Sir, with all due respect, tank warfare has evolved dramatically since World War II. The T-34 was revolutionary for its time, but its design principles are obsolete in the age of composite armor and digital fire control systems. Harmon's gaze fixed on the younger officer. Are they? Or have we convinced ourselves that complexity equals superiority? He changed the display again, showing a German Tiger tank alongside a T-34. In 1943, the Tiger was technologically superior to the T-34 in almost every measurable category. Better optics, better gun, thicker armor, and yet the Soviet Union won the armor war on the Eastern Front. Why almost? The question hung in the air momentarily. Kaufman spoke first. Production capacity. The Soviets built 50,000 T-34s. The Germans built only 1,400 Tigers. Exactly, Harmon nodded. But why could the Soviets produce so many more tanks? Chen's eyes widened slightly as understanding dawned. Design philosophy. The T-34 was designed for mass production, simplified systems, standardized parts, ease of maintenance. While the Tiger, Williams added, comprehension replacing skepticism, was an engineering masterpiece that was difficult to produce, consumed enormous resources, and was a maintenance nightmare. Harmon allowed himself a small smile. And which path has our XM-1A program followed? The room fell silent as the implication became clear. Our assignment, Harmon continued, is to evaluate whether we've lost sight of fundamental principles in our pursuit of technological superiority. Project Thunder will analyze both historical lessons and current intelligence to determine if our approach to tank design needs recalibration. Rodriguez spoke up from his position near the wall. Sir, are you suggesting we should be building simpler tanks rather than more advanced ones? I'm suggesting we should be building more effective tanks, Captain. The question is whether effectiveness necessarily correlates with complexity. Harmon looked around the table. This team will answer that question through rigorous analysis rather than assumption. Chen's expression remained skeptical. Colonel, I've spent my career pushing the boundaries of tank technology. Every advance we've made has provided measurable improvements in capability. At what cost, Doctor? Not just financial, but in terms of battlefield effectiveness. Harmon's tone remained measured. A tank that breaks down cannot fight. A tank too heavy to cross a bridge cannot advance. A tank that requires specialized maintenance crews and equipment cannot be sustained in prolonged combat. Williams nodded slowly, his military experience aligning with Harmon's assessment. The best tank isn't necessarily the most advanced one. It's the one that can get to the fight, survive the fight, and keep fighting afterward. Precisely. Harmon changed the display one final time, showing a document titled Project Thunder Objectives and Timeline. We have 3 months to complete our analysis and provide recommendations. General Parker has arranged for us to have access to the Armor Museum's collection, including operational T-34 and Tiger tanks. We'll also have complete data on the XM-1A program and all available intelligence on the Dragon Scale prototype. Kaufman raised a hand. Colonel, I'm curious, why is this project so urgent? Tank development typically occurs over years, not months. Harmon's expression grew more serious. Because intelligence indicates the Dragon Scale prototype is already in low-rate initial production. If our assessment of its capabilities is accurate, it represents a fundamental shift in the balance of armored warfare power. We need to understand what we're facing and adjust our approach accordingly. Chen tapped her tablet thoughtfully. We should begin with a comprehensive performance comparison between the XM-1A prototype and historical data from both the T-34 and modern Russian tanks. Agreed. Harmon turned to Williams. Colonel Williams, I want you to analyze the tactical implications. How would our current armored units fare against a force equipped with tanks built on T-34 design principles, but with modern technology? Williams nodded. I'll run the scenarios through our combat simulation systems. Dr. Kaufman, your expertise in Soviet armor development will be crucial. I want a detailed analysis of how their design philosophy evolved from the T-34 through the Cold War era and where they may have deviated from successful principles. The historian smiled slightly. I've been writing about this for decades, Colonel. I'll prepare a comprehensive assessment. Captain Rodriguez, Harmon turned to the young officer. Your combat experience provides a perspective the rest of us lack. I want you to review the maintenance and operational records from Iraq and Afghanistan. Focus on where our current tanks succeeded and where they faced limitations in actual combat conditions. Rodriguez straightened. Yes, sir. We'll convene daily at EO 800 for progress reports and coordination. Harmon surveyed the team. Any questions? Chen raised her hand. When can we examine the actual tanks? I'd prefer to start with physical inspection rather than just reviewing documentation. This afternoon, I've arranged for private access to the Armor Museum's restoration facility. Harmon looked around the table one more time. If there's nothing else, let's get to work. We have a lot of ground to cover in limited time. As the team gathered their materials, Williams approached Harmon privately. Colonel, I feel I should disclose something. His voice was low. I was part of the original requirements development team for the XM-1A program 3 years ago. Some of the design decisions you're questioning originated from recommendations I helped formulate. Harmon studied the younger officer. And how do you feel about those decisions now, Colonel Williams? Williams hesitated before answering. I believe they were correct at the time, based on everything I knew and had been taught. He straightened his shoulders, but I'm willing to reconsider in light of new evidence. That's what good officers do. Harmon nodded with approval. That's why you're on this team, Colonel. Not despite your involvement in the XM-1A program, but because of it. You understand the reasoning behind the current approach, which means you're best positioned to identify where that reasoning may have gone astray. Williams seemed relieved. Thank you, sir. I won't let my past positions cloud my judgment. As the team dispersed to begin their assignments, Harmon remained in the briefing room alone. He approached the display screen, which still showed the comparative image of the Tiger and T-34 tanks. The contrast between German and Soviet design philosophy had determined the outcome on the Eastern Front. Complexity versus simplicity. Perfect engineering versus practical effectiveness. The lessons had been written in blood and steel across the battlefields of World War II. And now, 7 decades later, those same lessons might determine the future of American armored warfare. The question was whether the Pentagon would be willing to learn from history or continue down a path that prioritized technology over fundamental principles. Harmon's reflection appeared faintly in the screen, superimposed over the historical tanks. The young lieutenant who had faced T-34s in Korea now stood on the precipice of a different kind of battle, a battle of ideas and approaches that could shape American military capability for decades to come. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders. But unlike the tanks he had once commanded, this was a weight he was still strong enough to bear. The cavernous restoration facility behind the Armor Museum hummed with the sound of specialized equipment. Massive overhead lights illuminated the 2 tanks positioned in the center of the concrete floor. Side by side, they presented a study in contrasting design philosophies. The T-34-85, with its distinctive sloped armor and low profile, appeared deceptively simple compared to the German Tiger I beside it. Both had been restored to operational condition through years of painstaking work by the museum's technical staff. Project Thunder Team moved around the vehicles, examining different aspects based on their expertise. Chen focused on the suspension and drive systems. Williams studied the turret layouts and crew positions. Kaufman circled both tanks, occasionally taking notes on his tablet. Harmon stood slightly apart, watching not just the tanks but the team's reactions to them. The weight difference is remarkable, Chen noted, consulting her tablet. The Tiger I is 63 tons, the T-34-85 is 32. Yet the protection level against contemporary ammunition wasn't dramatically different thanks to the T-34's armor slope. Williams had climbed onto the Tiger's engine deck to peer into the commander's cupola. The visibility from the Tiger is superior. German optics were significantly better. At twice the production cost, Kaufman added, and they required precision manufacturing that couldn't be maintained as Germany's industrial base came under increasing aerial bombardment. Rodriguez had positioned himself beside the T-34, running his hand along the glacier's plate. Sir, the angle of this front armor is incredible. I'd never appreciated it from just seeing photographs. Harmon nodded. At that angle, a 75mm shell would need to penetrate effectively twice the actual thickness of the plate. Simple but effective solution, Chen acknowledged. We've moved away from relying on slope alone with the introduction of composite and reactive armor, but the principle remains valid. Harmon approached the T-34 and gestured for the team to gather around. I want you all to climb inside. Experience the ergonomics firsthand. It will give you a better understanding of both the limitations and the advantages of the design. One by one, they climbed through the hatch into the fighting compartment of the Soviet tank. The interior was cramped by modern standards. The controls rudimentary. Manual turret traverse instead of hydraulic or electric systems. Simple optical sights rather than sophisticated fire control computers. Chen emerged first, her expression thoughtful. It's primitive compared to modern tanks, but every system is accessible. Field repairs would be straightforward for a trained crew. Williams followed, ducking his head as he exited the turret. The three-man turret is a significant limitation. Having the commander double as the gunner means he can't maintain situational awareness while engaging targets. A limitation the Soviets recognized and addressed in later designs, Kaufman noted, but they accepted that compromise to keep the overall profile low and production simple during a critical phase of the war. Rodriguez was the last to emerge. "Sir, I noticed something interesting about the ammunition storage. It's arranged for much easier access than in our current tanks. In an Abrams, the loader has to maneuver in a confined space with blast doors. In this design, the rounds are positioned for maximum efficiency." Harmon nodded with approval. The young officer had spotted a detail the others had missed. "Now the Tiger," he directed. The contrast was striking. The Tiger's interior was more spacious, the controls more refined, the optics noticeably superior, but the complexity of every system was immediately apparent. 5 road wheels with individual torsion bars, Chen observed after examining the suspension. Incredibly complex compared to the T-34's Christie suspension. Effective, but difficult to manufacture and maintain. Williams studied the turret mechanism. Electric turret traverse with manual backup. More sophisticated than the T-34, but also more vulnerable to failure in combat conditions. Kaufman pointed out the interleaved road wheels. These were a maintenance nightmare. In Russian mud and snow, they would become packed with debris and ice. Removing a damaged inner wheel meant removing all the wheels in front of it first. Harmon allowed them to complete their examination before speaking. Both these tanks represented the state-of-the-art in 1944. Both had strengths and weaknesses. But one fundamental difference determined their impact on the war. He paused to ensure he had their full attention. The Soviets built 50,000 T-34s. The Germans built 1,400 Tigers. The implication hung in the air between them. Numbers matter in warfare, Williams acknowledged. No matter how superior an individual tank might be, it cannot be everywhere at once. Chen had been making calculations on her tablet. The resource allocation is even more striking. The raw materials used to build one Tiger could have produced almost 3 T-34s. And the manufacturing complexity meant that production actually slowed as the war progressed, Kaufman added. German factories couldn't be easily relocated away from Allied bombing, unlike Soviet production that moved east of the Ural Mountains. Harmon nodded. Now consider our current approach with the XM-1A program. We're creating a tank that costs over $20 million per unit. That requires specialized maintenance facilities. That consumes fuel at an unsustainable rate in prolonged combat. That cannot cross many existing bridges due to weight restrictions. He moved between the two historical tanks, resting a hand on each. The lesson isn't that we should build technically inferior tanks. It's that we should recognize the point of diminishing returns in complexity and technological sophistication. Rodriguez spoke up. "Sir, are you suggesting the XM-1A is our Tiger? An impressive but ultimately flawed concept?" "That's exactly what I'm suggesting, Captain. And if intelligence about the Dragon-scale prototype is accurate, our potential adversaries have recognized this fundamental truth while we've continued down a problematic path." Chen's expression remained skeptical. "Colonel, with all due respect, modern warfare demands technological superiority. An outdated or simplified tank would be vulnerable to current anti-tank weapons." "No one is advocating for outdated technology, Doctor," Harmon replied. "The question is whether we've achieved the optimal balance between capability and practicality. The Russians and Chinese appear to be pursuing a different balance point than we are." He gestured toward a side room. "Let's continue this discussion with some additional context." The team followed him into a conference room adjacent to the restoration area. The walls displayed large photographs of tanks in combat situations from World War II through modern conflicts. Harmon activated a display screen showing technical specifications for the current M1A2 Abrams alongside preliminary data on the XM-1A prototype. "The evolution of the Abrams itself tells a story," he began. "The original M1 weighed 58 tons. The current M1A2 SCP-V3 weighs 73.5 tons. Each upgrade added weight, complexity, and cost while reducing operational range and increasing maintenance requirements. Williams studied the data. The protection levels and firepower have increased significantly, Colonel. Those improvements were deemed necessary based on evolving threats. But at what point does increased protection become self-defeating? Harmon challenged. If a tank becomes too heavy to cross bridges, too fuel-hungry to maintain operational tempo, too complex to repair in the field, has it actually become more effective or less? Chen crossed her arms. The logical conclusion of your argument would be to deliberately build less capable tanks. That seems counterintuitive from a design perspective. Not less capable, Harmon corrected, more balanced, optimized for actual combat conditions rather than technical specifications. Kaufman, who had been relatively quiet, spoke up. There's historical precedent for this approach. After analyzing the T-34, the Germans developed the Panther tank, which incorporated many Soviet design principles. Sloped armor, wider tracks for better ground pressure distribution, emphasis on mobility alongside protection and firepower. And the Panther was arguably their most effective tank, Williams acknowledged, though it still suffered from excessive complexity in its final drive system. Harmon nodded. The Russians and Chinese appear to be following a similar path of learning, for sure, from historical success. Intelligence suggests the Dragon-scale prototype emphasizes balanced design principles rather than maximum protection or firepower. Rodriguez had been examining the comparative weight specifications. Sir, the fuel consumption difference alone is striking. The XM-1A prototype would require almost twice the logistical support of an equivalent force equipped with tanks matching the estimated Dragon-scale specifications. In a near-peer conflict, that logistical burden could be decisive, Harmon agreed, especially if supply lines come under consistent attack. Chen's expression had shifted from skepticism to thoughtful consideration. If we were to reconsider the XM-1A design from first principles, what specific changes would you recommend, Colonel? Before Harmon could answer, the conference room door opened. General Parker entered with a grave expression. Sorry to interrupt, he said, but we've received updated intelligence that changes the timeline. He handed Harmon a sealed folder. The Chinese have accelerated the Dragon-scale program. Initial production models are expected to enter service within 18 months, not 3 years as previously estimated. The atmosphere in this room shifted immediately. What had been an academic exercise suddenly took on greater urgency. Harmon opened the folder and quickly scanned its contents. How reliable is this intelligence? Multiple sources confirm, Parker replied. Satellite imagery shows expansion of production facilities. Intercepts indicate accelerated training programs for crews. Harmon looked up from the documents, his expression grim. They're preparing for potential conflict, not just modernizing their forces. Parker nodded. That's the assessment from the Pentagon, which means Project Thunder just became the highest priority armor development initiative in the DoD. He looked around at the team. Your timeline has been compressed. We need preliminary findings in 30 days, not 90. Williams frowned. Sir, that's barely enough time to complete the analysis, much less develop actionable recommendations. It's all the time we have, Colonel Williams. Parker's tone brooked no argument. The Secretary of Defense is briefing the President next month on our response to Chinese military modernization. Project Thunder's assessment will be central to that briefing. He turned back to Harmon. Jim, I need you to focus this team on the most critical aspects. What can we learn from the Dragon-scale approach that might be immediately applicable to our own programs? Harmon considered for a moment. We'll need additional resources. Access to the XM-1A prototype itself, not just documentation. And I want to examine the most recent captured Russian tanks from Ukraine. Done. Parker nodded. Whatever you need, you'll have. This project now has alpha priority. As Parker departed, the team looked to Harmon for direction. The situation has changed, he acknowledged, but our fundamental mission remains the same. We need to determine whether our current approach to tank design is optimal for future combat environments. Chen had been reviewing the new intelligence documents. These specifications for the Dragon scale are remarkable if accurate. They're claiming mobility comparable to our M1A2 with fuel consumption closer to a Bradley fighting vehicle. How would they achieve that? Rodriguez asked. Lighter weight, more efficient power plant, simplified drivetrain. Chen's expression reflected professional admiration despite herself. If these numbers are correct, they've achieved a breakthrough in the weight-to-protection ratio. Harmon stood. We need to refocus our approach. Dr. Chen, I want you to concentrate on the Dragon scale's apparent technical innovations. What are they doing differently that allows for this performance profile? She nodded. I'll need access to all available intelligence and permission to consult with materials science specialists at DARPA. You'll have it. Harmon turned to Williams. Colonel, revise your tactical analysis to account for the accelerated timeline. How would our current forces fare against units equipped with Dragon-scale tanks in potential flashpoint scenarios? Taiwan, Korea, Eastern Europe. Yes, sir. Dr. Kaufman, I need you to expand your historical analysis to include how tank design changes have affected previous conflicts, specifically instances where a qualitative or philosophical advantage offset a quantitative disadvantage. The historian nodded. The Israeli experience against Soviet-equipped Arab forces would be particularly relevant. Captain Rodriguez, Harmon faced the young officer, your role has just become more important. I need you to assemble a team of current Abrams commanders and crews, men and women with recent combat experience. We need their perspective on what works and what doesn't in actual operations. Rodriguez straightened. I know exactly who to contact, sir. Good. Harmon surveyed his team. The stakes have just increased significantly. This isn't merely an academic exercise anymore. The future of American armored warfare capability could depend on our findings. As the team dispersed with renewed purpose, Harmon remained in the conference room alone. He turned to the wall display showing the evolution of American tanks from the M4 Sherman through the M1 Abrams series. Each generation had represented the best thinking of its era. Each had incorporated lessons from previous conflicts. But somewhere along the way, American tank design had diverged from the balanced approach that had proven so effective in the past. The Dragon scale represented a return to fundamentals by America's most significant military competitors. The question was whether the Pentagon would recognize and respond to this challenge in time. Harmon's gaze settled on a photograph of an M26 Pershing in Korea. His first command, the tank he had taken into battle against T-34 85s, nearly identical to the one they had just examined. The memories flooded back with unexpected clarity. The bitter cold, the fear, the realization that their tanks were evenly matched with the enemy's despite America's industrial might and technological advantages. History was poised to repeat itself, but this time the balance might not be so even. Unless Project Thunder could change the Pentagon's thinking about the fundamental nature of effective tank design. The weight of that responsibility settled on Harmon's shoulders as he stared at the photograph from a war fought 7 decades earlier. Some lessons had to be learned anew by each generation. He just hoped this generation would listen before it was too late. The Armor Museum closed to the public at 1700 hours, but lights still burned in the restoration facility where Project Thunder had established its operations center. 3 days had passed since their initial examination of the historical tanks. 3 days of intensive analysis, debate, and increasingly concerning discoveries. Harmon stood before a whiteboard covered with diagrams and specifications, comparing the XM1A prototype design to both historical and contemporary tanks. Chen sat nearby, surrounded by technical documentation and material samples. Her initial skepticism had evolved into focused determination as the evidence mounted. The weight distribution is fundamentally flawed, she said, pointing to a cross-sectional diagram. They've added armor and systems without reconsidering the basic hull design. It's like building a skyscraper on foundations designed for a 3-story building. Harmon nodded. And the consequences? Increased stress on the suspension, reduced operational life for drive components, potential catastrophic failure under combat conditions. She shook her head. Engineering 101. You can't just keep adding weight without redesigning the underlying structure. The door opened as Williams and Rodriguez entered, returning from the simulation center where they had been running combat scenarios. Results are consistent across all simulated environments, Williams reported, his expression grim. The XM1A shows decreased battlefield survivability compared to the current M1A2 despite its enhanced protection. Harmon raised an eyebrow. Explain. Mobility kills. Williams displayed the simulation data on a nearby screen. The additional weight makes the XM1A more vulnerable to mobility damage. Once immobilized, even superior armor becomes irrelevant as enemy forces can maneuver to attack weaker points or simply bypass and isolate the vehicle. Rodriguez added, the fuel consumption issues are even more concerning. In extended operations, XM1A units consistently ran dry before achieving objectives. The logistics tail becomes so demanding that it compromises operational tempo. Harmon turned back to the whiteboard, adding these findings to their growing list of concerns. And how did the simulated Dragon scale perform? William's expression grew more serious. Troublingly well. Using the intelligence estimates of its capabilities, Dragon scale equipped forces consistently outmaneuvered our units. Their extended operational range and reduced logistical requirements allowed them to maintain offensive momentum, while our forces were still waiting for fuel resupply. The door opened again as Kaufman entered, carrying a leather-bound notebook that appeared decades old. "I found something," he announced without preamble. The Army conducted a comprehensive study of T-34 performance after the Korean War. It's been declassified but never digitized, which is why it doesn't appear in any of our databases. He placed the notebook on the central table. The conclusions are fascinating. Despite being technologically inferior to American tanks in many respects, the T-34-85 demonstrated superior battlefield mobility and operational sustainability. The study recommended incorporating specific T-34 design elements into future American tanks. Recommendations that were apparently ignored, Harmon observed, examining the faded pages. Not ignored, Kaufman corrected. The study was completed in 1954, just as the Army was pivoting toward preparations for mechanized warfare in Europe against the Soviet Union. The focus shifted to defeating newer Soviet tanks rather than learning from the T-34's strengths. Chen had joined them at the table, scanning the technical assessments in the old report. Some of these observations about weight distribution and ground pressure ratios are exactly what we're rediscovering now. She looked up. "We've come full circle in 70 years. Harmon nodded slowly. "History doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes." He turned to the team. "I think we've gathered enough preliminary evidence to brief General Parker. Our findings are consistent and concerning." "What exactly are we recommending, sir?" Rodriguez asked. "Abandoning the XM-1A program entirely?" "Not necessarily," Harmon moved to the whiteboard, "but a fundamental reconsideration of its design philosophy." He began writing a list. Push 1, rebalance protection, mobility, and firepower priorities. Reduce overall weight by 20% minimum. Simplify maintenance requirements for field conditions. 4, decrease fuel consumption to extend operational range. 5, optimize for actual combat scenarios rather than technical specifications. These principles guided the T-34's design, he continued. They remain valid today, despite technological advancements. Chen studied the list. Implementing these changes would require starting almost from scratch. The current XM-1A design can't simply be modified to achieve these goals. That's exactly my point, Doctor. We need to reconsider fundamental assumptions, not just iterate on an increasingly problematic design philosophy. Harmon surveyed his team. "Prepare your sections of the briefing. We present to General Parker tomorrow at 900. As the others gathered their materials, Harmon noticed Kaufman lingering over the old Korean War study. "Something else in there catch your attention, Doctor?" Kaufman nodded slowly. "There's a personal account from a tank commander who faced T-34s at the Chosin Reservoir. The details of the engagement are quite specific." He looked up at Harmon. "It was your unit, wasn't it?" Harmon's expression remained carefully neutral. "I was there, yes. This report contains your observations, your analysis of the T-34's performance characteristics." Kaufman tapped the page. "You've been making this same argument for 70 years. The older man was silent for a moment. "And yet here we are, making the same mistakes the Germans made with the Tiger tank." "Why didn't the Army listen then?" Kaufman asked. Harmon's gaze drifted to the photographs on the wall. American tanks through the decades. Each generation heavier, more complex, more specialized than the last. Because it's easier to add than to optimize. Easier to solve problems with more armor, bigger guns, more sophisticated systems. He shook his head. The difficult path is finding the perfect balance, the point where every element works in harmony without excess. The T-34 found that balance, Kaufman observed. It did, through necessity rather than choice. Harmon turned back to the historian. The Soviets couldn't match German optical technology or manufacturing precision, so they designed around those limitations. Created a tank that could be built in tremendous numbers with the resources and capabilities they had. And now the Chinese and Russians are deliberately returning to those principles. Harmon nodded. "While we continue adding complexity and weight until we've created a tank too heavy to cross most bridges and too fuel-hungry to maintain operational tempo." He closed the old notebook. "Tomorrow we tell General Parker that the most advanced military in the world needs to learn from a tank designed in 1940. Will he listen? Kilfman asked. He invited me here because he already suspects the truth. Harmon gathered his notes. The question is whether the Pentagon will listen to him. As evening fell over Fort Knox, the lights of the museum restoration facility continued to burn. Inside, Project Thunder prepared to challenge decades of American tank design philosophy with lessons from a Soviet tank that had changed the course of history once before. Whether those lessons would be heeded remained to be seen. But for Colonel James Harmon, the mission was clear. After 70 years, he might finally have the opportunity to ensure that the hard-won wisdom from Korea would shape the future of American armored warfare. The past and future had converged. Ancient wisdom and modern technology stood at a crossroads, and the security of the nation might depend on which path was chosen. The Pentagon's briefing room held an atmosphere of tension as Colonel James Harmon stood before the assembled military leadership. Four-star generals and civilian officials filled the tiered seating, their expressions ranging from skepticism to open hostility. Only General Parker, seated in the front row, offered an encouraging nod as Harmon prepared to present Project Thunder's preliminary findings. The large display behind Harmon showed side-by-side comparisons of the XM-1A prototype and intelligence estimates of the Chinese Dragon scale. The contrast was striking even to untrained eyes. Gentlemen, Harmon began, his voice carrying the authority of decades of experience. For the past 4 weeks, Project Thunder has conducted a comprehensive analysis of our current tank development program compared to emerging threats. Our findings are concerning. He activated the display controls, showing weight comparisons. The XM-1A prototype currently weighs 87 tons. Intelligence estimates place the Dragon scale at approximately 54 tons. This difference is not merely a question of size. It fundamentally affects every aspect of battlefield performance. Lieutenant General Frank Lewis, the Pentagon's Director of Armor Development, shifted impatiently in his seat. The weight difference reflects our superior protection standards, Colonel. American lives are worth the extra steel. Harmon nodded respectfully. Protection is indeed crucial, General Lewis, but true protection comes from a balance of factors. A tank immobilized due to mechanical failure from excessive weight offers no protection at all. A tank that runs out of fuel before reaching its objective becomes a stationary target. He advanced to the next slide, showing operational range comparisons. The XM-1A's estimated range is 260 kilometers on internal fuel. The Dragon scale's estimated range exceeds 400 kilometers. In practical terms, this means Chinese armored formations can travel 50% farther without refueling than our own forces. Theoretical numbers, Lewis interjected. Intelligence estimates are notoriously unreliable for systems still in development, which is why we validated these estimates against known Chinese engineering capabilities and observable testing data, Harmon countered calmly. Dr. Chen, would you elaborate? Emily Chen stepped forward. Her initial skepticism had transformed into passionate advocacy as the evidence mounted over the preceding weeks. Our analysis of satellite imagery confirms Dragon-scale prototypes completing long-range mobility trials across varied terrain. Thermal signatures indicate fuel consumption rates consistent with the intelligence estimates. She displayed enhanced images captured during Chinese military exercises. Furthermore, we've identified design elements specifically oriented toward weight reduction and fuel efficiency. Lewis leaned forward. So your recommendation is what exactly? That we abandon American engineering excellence to copy Chinese designs? Not at all, General. Harmon maintained his composure. Our recommendation is that we rebalance our approach to align with fundamental principles that have proven effective throughout the history of armored warfare. He displayed a new slide showing the T-34 alongside modern tanks. The most successful tank design in history wasn't the most technologically advanced. It was the one that achieved the optimal balance between protection, mobility, and firepower while remaining simple enough to mass produce and maintain under battlefield conditions. The room fell silent as Harmon continued. Project Thunder recommends a fundamental reconsideration of the XM-1A program. We propose reducing target weight by 25%, simplifying maintenance requirements, extending operational range, and emphasizing battlefield sustainability over maximum protection. The silence that followed was broken by General Lewis. You're proposing we throw away 3 years of development and billions in investment based on lessons from a Soviet tank designed 80 years ago? His tone carried undisguised contempt. Colonel Harmon, with all due respect to your distinguished service record, the world has moved on since Korea. Harmon held the general's gaze. Principles don't become obsolete, General. The Russians and Chinese recognize this, which is why they're incorporating T-34 design philosophy into 21st century technology. I believe we ignore those lessons at our peril. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs raised a hand, silencing further objection from Lewis. Colonel Harmon, your team's analysis is thought-provoking, but implementing your recommendations would require essentially starting from scratch with the next-generation tank program. The budgetary and timeline implications would be significant. More significant than facing a technologically comparable adversary with superior operational mobility and sustainability, Harmon challenged. The cost of redesign pales in comparison to the cost of defeat. The chairman's expression remained neutral. Thank you for your presentation, Colonel. The Joint Chiefs will consider your findings and make appropriate recommendations to the Secretary of Defense. It was a diplomatic dismissal. Harmon recognized the tone all too well from decades in uniform. The meeting was adjourned with polite thanks but no commitments. As the officials filed out, General Parker approached Harmon. You made a compelling case, Jim, but not compelling enough. Harmon gathered his materials. They're not ready to hear it. Give it time, the analysis is solid. Lewis may object, but others were listening. Parker glanced toward the departing officials. Continue your work. Refine your recommendations. I'll keep advocating at the senior levels. Harmon nodded, though his expression revealed doubt. We're running out of time, Will. Intelligence suggests Dragon-scale production is already ramping up. Then we need something more convincing than analysis and historical comparisons. Parker lowered his voice. Something that demonstrates the principles in action. Chen joined them, having overheard the conversation. General, what if we could build a demonstrator? Not a full prototype, but a scaled concept that embodies the design principles we're advocating. Parker considered this. How quickly? 8 weeks, Chen replied confidently. Using existing components where possible, modified to reflect our approach. It wouldn't be combat ready, but it would demonstrate the fundamental concepts. Harmon shook his head. The Pentagon won't allocate resources to a competing design when they're fully committed to the XM-1A. They don't need to. Parker's expression turned determined. I have discretionary funding for the Armor Center. Not enough for a full prototype, but perhaps sufficient for a concept demonstrator, especially if we get creative with existing resources. Harmon studied his old friend. You'd risk your career on this? If your analysis is correct, I'd be risking more by doing nothing. Parker straightened. Prepare a proposal for the demonstrator. Keep it under the radar. I'll secure the resources. As they departed the Pentagon, Harmon felt a familiar sensation from his combat days. The calm clarity that came with knowing the odds were against you, but the mission was essential. Project Thunder had just entered a new phase, one that would require more than analysis and recommendations. They needed to build a tank. The cavernous maintenance bay at Fort Knox normally housed damaged Abrams tanks awaiting repair. Now it served as Project Thunder's clandestine workshop. Under General Parker's authority, the space had been secured with restricted access. Only team members and essential support personnel were permitted entry. 2 weeks had passed since the Pentagon briefing. 2 weeks of intense planning and preparation. Now the real work was beginning. The center of the bay contained a stripped M1A1 Abrams hull, donated from training stock that had been scheduled for decommissioning. Around it stood various components salvaged from other vehicles and custom fabricated parts designed by Chen and her engineering team. Harmon surveyed the organized chaos with a mixture of concern and pride. His team had expanded to include select mechanics, fabricators, and engineers handpicked for both skill and discretion. All had signed extraordinary security agreements. What they were attempting walked a fine line between authorized research and direct challenge to the Pentagon's official program of record. Chen approached, tablet in hand showing detailed modification plans. We've removed 3 tons already just by stripping unnecessary systems, she reported. The redesigned turret will save another 4 when it's ready next week. Harmon nodded. In the power plant? That's where Captain Rodriguez came through. Chen led him to the far side of the bay where a massive engine sat on a test stand. It's a modified commercial diesel originally developed for heavy mining equipment. Lower output than the Abrams turbine, but far more fuel efficient and half the maintenance requirements. Rodriguez stood nearby, monitoring diagnostic equipment connected to the engine. It's putting out 1,700 horsepower, sir, he reported. Less than the current Abrams power plant, but with our reduced weight target, the power-to-weight ratio actually improves by 12%. Harmon examined the engine with appreciation. How did you acquire this? Rodriguez smiled slightly. Let's just say I have a cousin who works for the manufacturer. This was a test unit they were planning to scrap after completing their evaluation program. And the transmission? That's where we got lucky, Chen interjected. An experimental hydromechanical unit developed for the canceled Future Combat System program was sitting in storage at Aberdeen. General Parker arranged for it to be transferred as research equipment. Williams approached, carrying blueprints for the modified turret. We've made significant progress on the fire control system, he reported. By simplifying the electronic architecture and reducing redundant systems, we've cut weight while maintaining 90% of the capability. Harmon studied the designs. What about survivability? That's where our approach diverges most significantly from the XM-1A program, Williams acknowledged. We're emphasizing active protection systems and optimized armor distribution rather than simply adding more armor everywhere. He displayed a diagram showing armor thickness distribution across the hull and turret. We've concentrated protection where it's most needed based on actual combat data from Ukraine and Syria. Areas statistically less likely to be hit receive proportionally less armor. And the overall protection level, Harmon asked? Approximately 85% of the current Abrams standard, Williams admitted, but with vastly improved mobility and a reduced target profile. Our analysis suggests this represents the optimal balance point. Harmon nodded slowly. The Pentagon won't like the reduced protection metrics. They don't have to like them, Chen replied with characteristic bluntness. They just need to acknowledge the overall combat effectiveness improvements. Our design emphasizes not getting hit in the first place through superior mobility and reduced profile. Kaufman joined the discussion, having been examining historical data on armor distribution effectiveness. The Germans learned this lesson the hard way, he noted. Their late-war Panther tanks had front armor that could withstand almost any Allied gun, but thinner side armor. They recognized that tanks oriented toward the enemy presented much smaller targets from the front, so they optimized protection accordingly. Harmon circled the partially assembled vehicle, his experienced eye noting the dramatic changes already evident in the modified hull. How soon until we have something that moves? 4 weeks for basic mobility, Chen estimated. 6 for a fully functional demonstrator. We're fabricating components as fast as possible, but some items have long lead times. We may not have 6 weeks. Harmon's expression darkened. Intelligence reports the Chinese have accelerated Dragon scale production even further. First operational units are expected within 12 months. The team exchanged concerned glances. We could expedite by focusing on core functionality and deferring secondary systems, Rodriguez suggested. Get it moving and shooting, even if some of the auxiliary features aren't fully implemented. Harmon nodded. Do it. General Parker is holding the Pentagon at bay for now, but pressure is mounting. Lewis has been asking questions about our activities here. Should we be concerned about interference? Williams asked. Parker has maintained that we're conducting historical analysis and theoretical modeling, not building an alternative prototype. Harmon's expression was grim. But that fiction becomes harder to maintain with each passing day. Chen squared her shoulders. Then we work faster. Double shifts starting tomorrow. The team dispersed to their respective areas, each focused on their critical tasks. Harmon remained beside the partially assembled vehicle, his hand resting on the stripped hull. The irony wasn't lost on him. After 7 decades, he found himself once again standing against conventional wisdom, arguing for a balanced approach to tank design in the face of institutional resistance. The stakes were even higher now than they had been in Korea. The future of American armored warfare capability hung in the balance, along with the lives of countless young soldiers who would someday take these machines into combat. His reverie was interrupted by the maintenance bay doors opening. General Parker entered, accompanied by a man Harmon didn't recognize. The stranger wore civilian clothes, but his bearing suggested military background. Parker made the introductions. Colonel Harmon, this is Richard Bennett, Deputy Inspector General for the Department of Defense. He's here to observe our progress. Bennett extended his hand. Colonel, I've heard a great deal about Project Thunder. Harmon shook the offered hand, his expression guarded. All positive, I hope. Let's say, intriguing. Bennett surveyed the activity around them. General Lewis has raised concerns about unauthorized prototype development occurring under the guise of historical research. Parker's expression tightened. As I've explained to General Lewis, Project Thunder is conducting theoretical modeling and component testing, all within my authority as commander of the Armor Center. Bennett's gaze settled on the modified Abrams hull. That looks like more than theoretical modeling, General. Component testing requires physical assemblies, Harmon interjected smoothly. We're evaluating weight reduction and mobility enhancements using decommissioned equipment. Standard research procedure. Bennett nodded slowly, clearly unconvinced. The Secretary is very interested in your work, Colonel Harmon, particularly in light of the rather direct criticism your team leveled at the XM-1A program during your Pentagon briefing. We presented objective analysis based on historical precedent and current intelligence, Harmon replied. If that constitutes criticism, then perhaps the XM-1A program deserves to be criticized. A faint smile crossed Bennett's face. Refreshingly direct. Most officers approaching their 50th year of service develop more political acumen. I never found much use for politics on the battlefield, Mr. Bennett. Indeed, Bennett continued his survey of the facility. Well, I've seen enough for my preliminary report. I'll be back to monitor your progress. The Inspector General's office has a responsibility to ensure defense funds are being utilized appropriately. As Bennett departed, Parker turned to Harmon with concern. Lewis is making his move. He's using the IG to shut us down. Harmon considered this, or Bennett could be genuinely evaluating the situation. His reaction seemed more curious than hostile. Either way, our timeline just got compressed. Parker glanced at the partially assembled vehicle. How soon can you demonstrate something concrete? Chen estimates 4 weeks for basic mobility. Make it 3, Parker instructed. I'll hold them off as long as I can, but we need tangible results to justify this project's continuation. After Parker left, Harmon called the team together. He explained the situation without sugarcoating the challenges they faced. The Pentagon is aware of our activities. We have 3 weeks to demonstrate a functional prototype that validates our design approach. Otherwise, Project Thunder will be shut down and the XM-1A program will continue unchanged. Chen shook her head. 3 weeks is impossible for a complete system. Then we focus on what matters most, Harmon replied. Mobility, operational range, power-to-weight ratio, the fundamental advantages our approach offers over the XM-1A design. A mobility demonstrator, Rodriguez suggested. We could have that ready in 3 weeks if we defer weapons integration and focus purely on the drive systems. Williams nodded in agreement. It would allow us to demonstrate the most critical performance advantages without getting bogged down in secondary systems. Do it, Harmon ordered. 3 weeks from today, we need to show a functioning mobility platform that proves our design approach is superior. The team dispersed with renewed urgency. The next 3 weeks would determine whether Project Thunder changed the future of American tank design or became merely a footnote in Pentagon history. The countdown had begun. 2 weeks into their accelerated schedule, disaster struck. Harmon received the call at 300 hours. A fire had broken out in the maintenance bay. By the time he arrived, smoke still billowed from the building as fire crews worked to ensure all hotspots were extinguished. Chen stood outside, her face smudged with soot, expression devastated. What happened? Harmon demanded. Electrical fire. Started in the main power distribution panel. Her voice was hollow with shock. The suppression system activated, but not before significant damage occurred. Parker arrived moments later, surveying the scene with dismay. Casualties? None, sir, Rodriguez reported, joining them from the building entrance. No personnel were present when the fire started. The prototype? Harmon asked, though he already suspected the answer. Rodriguez shook his head. Major damage to the electrical systems and hydraulics. The hull appears salvageable, but most of our custom components are destroyed. Parker's expression darkened. Arson? Too early to tell, Rodriguez replied. But the timing is suspicious. Fire investigator is already inside. Harmon turned to Chen. How bad is it really? She took a deep breath, visibly pulling herself together. 6 weeks of work gone. Maybe more. We'd need to fabricate replacement components, rewire everything. She trailed off, the magnitude of the setback evident in her expression. We don't have 6 weeks, Harmon reminded her grimly. I know. Chen squared her shoulders. But we might have another option. She led them to a separate storage building adjacent to the main facility. Inside, partial assemblies and components were arranged on workbenches and storage racks. We've been testing individual subsystems here before integration, she explained. The transmission, suspension components, power distribution systems. They're not assembled, but they exist. Harmon surveyed the scattered components. Can you build something functional from these parts? Not a complete prototype, Chen admitted, but perhaps a partial demonstrator, enough to validate the core mobility concepts. Parker studied the components. How long? 7 days, maybe 5 with round-the-clock work. Chen's expression was determined despite her exhaustion. It won't be pretty, but it could move under its own power and demonstrate the fundamental advantages of our approach. Harmon nodded slowly. Do it. I'll handle the investigation and deal with the Pentagon. You focus on getting something operational. As Chen and Rodriguez began organizing the salvage effort, Parker drew Harmon aside. This wasn't an accident. Harmon had reached the same conclusion. Lewis? Possible. But he'd need someone inside to execute it. Parker's expression was grim. We need to identify the saboteur before they strike again. Restrict access to essential personnel only, Harmon instructed, and set up surveillance on the new assembly area. Already done. Parker checked his watch. I have to report this to the Pentagon. The fire will be impossible to hide. Tell them the truth. Research equipment was damaged in an electrical fire. Safety procedures prevented injuries. Harmon's expression remained neutral. No need to specify exactly what was damaged. After Parker departed, Harmon conducted his own inspection of the fire scene. The fire investigator, a civilian contractor with military experience, walked him through the damaged area. Point of origin was definitely the main electrical panel, the investigator confirmed, pointing to the charred remains. But whether it was equipment failure or deliberate tampering, I can't say yet. Harmon examined the panel closely. Any surveillance coverage of this area? Security cameras were disabled approximately 20 minutes before the fire started. The investigator's tone made his suspicions clear. System reported a routine maintenance cycle, which would require security credentials. Harmon straightened. Have you determined what caused the fire specifically? Preliminary analysis suggests a power surge through specific circuits, possibly caused by removed safety limiters. The investigator pointed to melted components. Someone who knew the system could have reconfigured it to fail catastrophically while appearing accidental. Harmon's expression hardened. I want a full report as soon as possible, and keep your investigation quiet for now. He left the damaged facility and found Williams organizing security for the new assembly area. We need to identify the saboteur, Harmon said without preamble. Review security logs for the past 48 hours. Check everyone who accessed the maintenance bay, especially anyone with electrical engineering experience. Williams nodded. I've already started the process. Security footage from adjacent areas is being compiled. Good, and implement new protocols immediately. Dual authentication for all access. No one works alone, regardless of clearance level. As Williams departed to implement these measures, Harmon stood alone amid the partial components that represented their last hope of completing the project on schedule. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure Project Thunder failed. The question was whether it was merely resistance to change from within the Pentagon or something more concerning. Either way, they now faced a nearly impossible deadline with severely limited resources. The odds of success had diminished dramatically. But Harmon had faced worse odds in Korea. When your tank was outgunned and outnumbered, you didn't surrender. You adapted. You improvised. You overcame. The team would do the same now. 4 days later, Harmon stood in the hastily converted storage building that now served as Project Thunder's workshop. Before him sat what Chen had dubbed the Mule, a stripped-down demonstrator that bore little resemblance to a conventional tank. The vehicle consisted of a lightweight, welded frame supporting the essential systems they had salvaged and rebuilt. The modified diesel engine, the experimental transmission, the simplified suspension system. No turret, no weapon systems, not even proper armor plating. But it incorporated every fundamental mobility innovation they had developed. Chen approached, wiping grease from her hands. Dark circles under her eyes testified to the round-the-clock effort the team had maintained. It's ready for initial testing, she reported. We've completed the power systems integration and basic control setup. Harmon studied the unconventional vehicle. Will it actually demonstrate what we need it to? Power-to-weight ratio, fuel efficiency, mobility over varied terrain. Chen nodded confidently. Those are the core advantage of our approach, and this platform will demonstrate all three. Rodriguez joined them, reviewing diagnostic data on a tablet. Engine is performing within expected parameters. Transmission integration is complete. We're ready for controlled movement tests. What about security? Harmon asked. Have we identified our saboteur? Williams approached, his expression grim. Nothing conclusive yet, but we've implemented maximum security protocols. Armed guards, constant surveillance, restricted access to essential personnel only. Harmon nodded, though his concern remained evident. When can we conduct the first test? Tomorrow morning, Chen replied. We need to complete final calibrations and safety checks. Make it tonight, Harmon instructed. We're running out of time. As if to emphasize his point, the workshop door opened to admit General Parker, accompanied by Richard Bennett from the Inspector General's office. Bennett surveyed the unusual vehicle with evident surprise. This is quite different from what I observed previously, Colonel. Circumstances required adaptation, Harmon replied evenly. The mule is a simplified demonstrator focusing on mobility innovations rather than a complete prototype. Bennett circled the vehicle, studying its unconventional configuration. And this will demonstrate your design approach how exactly? By validating the fundamental principles we've advocated, Harmon explained. Superior mobility, extended operational range, reduced maintenance requirements, the core advantages that differentiate our approach from the XM-1A program. Bennett nodded slowly. General Lewis has formally requested that Project Thunder be terminated. He claims you're exceeding your authorized research parameters and undermining the official program of record. Parker stepped forward. Mr. Bennett, Colonel Harmon's team has made significant breakthroughs that directly address critical vulnerabilities in our current approach. Terminating this project would be a disservice to national security. That's for the Secretary to decide. Bennett's tone remained neutral. I'm here to observe your demonstrator in action and report my findings. If your innovations are as significant as you claim, they deserve proper evaluation. Harmon exchanged glances with Parker. Bennett's position seemed more nuanced than they had initially suspected. We're conducting the first mobility test tonight, Harmon informed him. You're welcome to observe. Bennett checked his watch. I'll be there. And Colonel, I should inform you that General Lewis is arriving tomorrow to conduct his own evaluation of Project Thunder. The Secretary has authorized his visit despite General Parker's objections. After Bennett departed, Parker turned to Harmon with concern. Lewis won't be coming to evaluate. He's coming to shut us down. Then we need to give Bennett something compelling enough to report back to the Secretary, Harmon replied. Tonight's test needs to be flawless. Parker nodded grimly. I'll handle the arrangements. You make sure that contraption performs as advertised. As Parker left, Harmon turned to his team. You heard the situation. Tonight's test will determine whether Project Thunder continues or dies. I need everything perfect. Chen straightened her shoulders despite her exhaustion. It will be, sir. The mule may not look impressive, but its performance will speak for itself. It better, Harmon replied, because tomorrow we face our toughest audience yet. The Fort Knox test range stretched before them, illuminated by powerful floodlights that created pools of harsh brightness against the Kentucky night. A simple course had been established, including varied terrain features to demonstrate the mule's mobility capabilities. A small group had assembled to observe the demonstration. Harmon, Parker, and Bennett stood on an elevated platform that provided clear visibility of the entire course. Several senior officers from the Armor Center had been invited to witness the test, along with the core Project Thunder team. The mule sat at the starting point, its utilitarian frame lacking the imposing presence of a conventional tank. To the uninitiated, it might have resembled a strange dune buggy more than a military vehicle, but Harmon knew that appearances meant nothing compared to performance. Chen and Rodriguez made final adjustments before the test. Williams coordinated with range safety personnel to ensure all protocols were followed. Bennett checked his watch impatiently. I have a video conference with the Secretary at 0700 tomorrow, Colonel. I'll need to report something substantive. You'll have it, Harmon assured him, though his own tension was evident in his rigid posture. A few minutes later, Chen approached the observation platform. We're ready, sir. Harmon nodded. Proceed with the demonstration. Chen returned to the mule and climbed into the driver's position. Rodriguez took the commander's seat beside her, monitoring diagnostic equipment. The diesel engine rumbled to life, its sound noticeably different from the distinctive turbine whine of the Abrams. Deeper, more subdued. The vehicle began moving forward, accelerating smoothly onto the course. First phase demonstrates acceleration and maneuverability, Williams explained to Bennett. The mule weighs approximately 28 tons, compared to 70 plus for a current Abrams. The vehicle accelerated rapidly, reaching 30 miles per hour within seconds. It executed a tight figure-8 maneuver, demonstrating agility that seemed impossible for its size. Impressive, Bennett acknowledged, but speed alone doesn't win battles. Watch the next section, Harmon directed. The course transitioned to a series of obstacles. A steep incline, a water trough, a section of soft mud designed to simulate challenging terrain. The mule navigated each with apparent ease, Its wide tracks and balanced weight distribution allowed it to climb the incline without losing momentum. It crossed the water obstacle without hesitation and traversed the mud section without becoming bogged down. Our approach prioritizes mobility in all conditions, Harmon explained. The XM-1A's excessive weight compromises performance in soft ground and limits bridge crossing capabilities. Bennett made notes on his tablet as the demonstration continued. Final phase demonstrates endurance, Williams announced. The mule will now complete 30 laps of the course without refueling. Based on distance and consumption rates, this simulates an operational range of approximately 400 kilometers. Bennett raised an eyebrow. The current Abrams has a range of approximately 260 kilometers, correct? Closer to 200 in actual field conditions, Harmon confirmed. The XM-1A is projected to be even less due to increased weight. For the next hour, the mule continuously circled the course, maintaining consistent performance without any signs of mechanical stress or fuel depletion. Remarkable, Bennett admitted as the demonstration concluded. But I'm curious how this translates to combat effectiveness. Your design clearly sacrifices protection for mobility. It's not a sacrifice, but a rebalancing, Harmon corrected. Modern combat data from Ukraine and Syria demonstrates that mobility and first strike capability are more determinative of survival than armor thickness. He gestured toward the mule as Chen brought it to a stop near the observation platform. A tank that can reach the battlefield faster, remain operational longer, and reposition more quickly has fundamental advantages that no amount of armor can offset. Bennett considered this. General Lewis would argue that American doctrine prioritizes crew survival above all else. The best crew protection is not getting hit in the first place, Harmon countered. Our approach enhances survivability through superior mobility and reduced target profile while maintaining adequate protection against most threats. Before Bennett could respond, Williams approached rapidly from the communication station. Colonel, we have a situation. Security reports unauthorized access attempts at the workshop. Someone tried to bypass the new protocols 20 minutes ago. Harmon's expression darkened. The saboteur is making another attempt. I've dispatched additional security, Williams reported, but we should return immediately. Bennett's interest was clearly piqued. Saboteur? The fire wasn't an accident, Parker explained grimly. Someone has been actively working to undermine Project Thunder. Bennett's expression shifted to one of concern. That's a serious allegation, General. One we can discuss en route, Harmon interjected. Mr. Bennett, would you accompany us back to the facility? I believe you'll find what awaits us there quite relevant to your evaluation. The ride back to the workshop was tense. Harmon briefly explained the sabotage situation to Bennett, whose professional interest appeared genuinely engaged by this development. You believe someone within the defense establishment is actively undermining your project? Bennett asked. The evidence suggests precisely that, Harmon confirmed. The saboteur needed detailed knowledge of our systems and high-level security access. And you suspect General Lewis is involved? Harmon chose his words carefully. I suspect someone who benefits from maintaining the status quo, regardless of its flaws. Whether that's General Lewis or someone else remains to be determined. Upon arriving at the workshop, they found security personnel surrounding a civilian contractor who had been apprehended attempting to access the facility. Robert Jenkins, Williams reported, electronics specialist contracted through Defense Systems Integration Corporation. He has legitimate access to multiple secure facilities on base, but not to our workshop after hours. Jenkins sat handcuffed in a chair, his expression defiant. I was conducting authorized maintenance. Check with General Lewis if you don't believe me. Bennett's eyebrows rose. You're claiming General Lewis authorized you to access this facility? Jenkins hesitated, realizing he had said too much. I meant my supervisor, standard maintenance protocols. At midnight? Williams challenged, without proper clearance or notification. Jenkins remained silent, his earlier bravado evaporating. Bennett turned to Harmon. This requires formal investigation. If a senior officer is indeed involved in sabotaging an official research project, that constitutes a serious ethics violation at minimum. Or worse, Parker added grimly. Bennett nodded. I'll need to report this to the Secretary immediately, along with my observations of your demonstration. In the meantime, I suggest you maintain enhanced security and prepare for General Lewis's arrival tomorrow. He's scheduled to arrive at 1,000 hours. After Bennett departed with military police to process Jenkins for questioning, Harmon gathered his team. The demonstration was successful, but tomorrow brings our greatest challenge yet. Lewis won't be easily convinced. especially now that his associate has been apprehended. We should prepare a comprehensive briefing, Williams suggested. Focus on the performance metrics from tonight's demonstration. Chen nodded in agreement. The data is compelling. 40% improvement in power-to-weight ratio, 60% increase in operational range, 30% reduction in projected maintenance requirements. Numbers alone won't sway Lewis, Harmon cautioned. He's ideologically committed to the XM1A approach. We need something more dramatic to make our case. Rodriguez, who had been quietly monitoring diagnostic data from the demonstration, looked up with sudden inspiration. What about a direct comparison? The mule versus an Abrams on the same course. Harmon considered this. Lewis would dismiss it as an unfair comparison given the mule's unfinished state. Not if we handicap the mule, Rodriguez countered. Restrict its performance to only a marginal advantage. Make the victory narrow enough to be credible, but clear enough to be undeniable. A slow smile spread across Harmon's face. A competition where even our deliberately limited prototype outperforms their production model. Exactly, sir. And we issue the challenge publicly, with Bennett present. Lewis won't be able to refuse without appearing to lack confidence in his program. Harmon nodded appreciatively. Make the arrangements. Prepare the mule for another demonstration tomorrow, and ensure we have comprehensive monitoring to document every performance metric. As the team dispersed to prepare for Hunter, Harmon remained behind with Parker. This is a risky strategy, Jim. Lewis will be furious. Good. Harmon's expression was determined. Angry men make mistakes, and we need Lewis to make a very public mistake tomorrow. What if the mule doesn't outperform the Abrams? There are no guarantees in a live demonstration. Then we lose, Harmon acknowledged. But Chen's data is solid. The mule's performance advantages are real and significant. And sometimes you have to risk everything on a single decisive engagement. Parker studied his old friend. You've been fighting this battle for 70 years, Jim, since Korea. And I'll continue fighting it until the Army learns the lesson or puts me in the ground. Harmon's voice carried the weight of decades of unheeded warnings. We lost good men in Korea because our tanks weren't optimized for actual combat conditions. I won't stand by and watch it happen again. The following morning dawned clear and cool. The test range had been prepared for what was now being called the Mobility Challenge. Word had spread throughout Fort Knox, drawing a larger crowd than anticipated. Senior officers from the Armor School, technical specialists, even a contingent from the Pentagon who had accompanied General Lewis. The mule had been positioned at the starting line alongside an M1A2 Abrams from the training fleet. The contrast was striking. The massive angular Abrams with its imposing turret and thick armor plate dwarfed the skeletal mule with its exposed components and utilitarian design. General Lewis arrived precisely at 1,000 hours, his expression darkening when he saw the assembled crowd and the obvious preparations for some kind of competitive demonstration. What exactly is happening here, Parker? He demanded as he approached the command platform where Harmon, Parker, and Bennett waited. A practical demonstration, General, Parker replied calmly. Since you've expressed concerns about Project Thunder's approach, Colonel Harmon proposed a direct comparison of mobility characteristics. Lewis glanced dismissively at the mule. That contraption is hardly a valid comparison to a fully developed Abrams tank. Which is why we've handicapped it appropriately, Harmon interjected. Engine output restricted to 80%. Payload ballast added to simulate combat weight. The comparison will focus solely on mobility and operational efficiency, the core principles our approach emphasizes. Lewis frowned. This demonstration wasn't part of my scheduled evaluation. Nevertheless, it provides a valuable opportunity to assess competing approaches objectively, Bennett observed. I've already informed the Secretary that I'll be observing this demonstration as part of my evaluation. Lewis found himself cornered. Refusing the challenge now would appear as lack of confidence in the very program he championed. Very well, he conceded with poor grace. But I want it noted that this comparison is fundamentally flawed, given the incomplete nature of your vehicle. Duly noted, Bennett replied, making an ostentatious note on his tablet. Shall we proceed? The demonstration had been structured as a three-phase challenge. First, a basic mobility course to test acceleration, maneuverability, and obstacle navigation. Second, a simulated tactical scenario requiring rapid position changes and terrain navigation. Finally, an endurance test measuring fuel consumption over extended operations. Rodriguez had been selected to command the mule, while an experienced Abrams crew from the training cadre would operate the production tank. As the vehicles took their positions, Harmon maintained a neutral expression despite the tension he felt. Everything depended on this demonstration. If the mule failed to perform as expected, Project Thunder would be terminated immediately. Phase 1 commencing, announced the range controller over the public address system. Both vehicles started their engines. The Abrams turbine emitted its characteristic high-pitched whine, while the mule's diesel produced a deeper, more subdued rumble. At the signal, both lurched forward. The mule accelerated quickly, taking an immediate lead despite its power limitations. The Abrams followed, powerful but noticeably less agile. The course required navigation through a series of tight turns and artificial obstacles. The mule maintained its advantage, executing the maneuvers with precision and speed. The Abrams performed competently, but couldn't match the mule's agility. Lewis watched with poorly concealed frustration as the mule completed the first phase significantly ahead of the Abrams. The reduced weight makes this an invalid comparison, he protested. Of course, a lighter vehicle can maneuver more quickly. Weight reduction is precisely one of our design principles, Harmon countered. The XM1A adds 15 tons to an already heavy platform. We're demonstrating the advantages of a more balanced approach. Bennett made notes without commenting, his expression giving nothing away. Proceeding to Phase 2, announced the controller. The second phase simulated a tactical engagement across varied terrain. Both vehicles were required to advance to designated positions, take simulated firing positions, then relocate rapidly to avoid counterfire. Again, the mule's superior mobility proved decisive. It completed the course in 17 minutes compared to the Abrams 23. Final phase commencing, came the announcement. Endurance evaluation. This phase would be the most telling. Both vehicles would run a continuous circuit until they had consumed a fixed amount of fuel. The distance covered would demonstrate relative efficiency. For the next hour, the two vehicles circled the course. The Abrams maintained a steady pace, its powerful turbine consuming fuel at a prodigious rate. The mule continued lap after lap, its more efficient diesel extending its operational range significantly. When the tests concluded, the results were unambiguous. The mule had covered 40% more distance on the same fuel allocation. Lewis stood rigid with anger as the final measurements were announced. Bennett reviewed the data with evident interest, occasionally glancing at Lewis to gauge his reaction. The demonstration is clear, Harmon stated as the vehicles returned to the starting position. Our approach offers significant advantages in mobility, maneuverability, and operational range compared to current platforms, and by extension, even greater advantages compared to the heavier XM1A design. Lewis finally erupted. This entire exercise is a sham. That contraption bears no resemblance to an actual combat vehicle. It has no armor, no weapon systems, no battlefield survivability features. It's a dune buggy with tank tracks. It's a mobility demonstrator, Harmon corrected calmly, designed specifically to validate the core principles that should guide our next-generation tank development. Principles the XM1A program has abandoned in favor of ever-increasing weight and complexity. The XM1A represents the pinnacle of American engineering excellence, Lewis insisted. It incorporates every advanced protection system, every fire control enhancement, every technological advantage our industry can produce. At what cost, Harmon challenged? 87 tons, limited operational range, bridge crossing limitations, massive logistical requirements, complexity that makes field maintenance nearly impossible. He gestured toward the mule. We've demonstrated today that a fundamentally different approach offers substantial advantages in the qualities that matter most in actual combat conditions. Lewis turned to Bennett. This demonstration proves nothing except that Colonel Harmon and his team have wasted valuable resources on an unauthorized prototype development program. I recommend immediate termination of Project Thunder and disciplinary action for all involved. Bennett considered this for a moment before responding. Actually, General Lewis, I see things quite differently. Colonel Harmon's team has demonstrated significant potential advantages to their approach, advantages that warrant serious consideration. He turned to address both generals. Furthermore, I find the evidence of sabotage against Project Thunder deeply concerning, especially given Mr. Jenkins' claim that his actions were authorized by you, General Lewis. Lewis's face flushed with anger. That's preposterous. I never authorized any sabotage. Perhaps not directly, Bennett replied, but the investigation will determine the facts. In the meantime, I'll be recommending to the Secretary that Project Thunder receive expanded funding and authorization to develop a full prototype incorporating these mobility innovations. Lewis could barely contain his fury. This isn't over, Parker. You've overstepped your authority, and there will be consequences. As Lewis stormed away, followed by his Pentagon contingent, Parker turned to Harmon with a relieved smile. Well played, Jim. I think we just won a significant battle. But not the war, Harmon cautioned. Lewis has powerful allies and institutional momentum on his side. The XM-1A program represents billions in contracts and years of development. It won't be abandoned easily. Bennett approached them. Gentlemen, I'll be returning to Washington immediately to brief the Secretary. Based on what I've witnessed, I believe Project Thunder deserves serious consideration as an alternative approach to our next-generation tank development. After Bennett departed, Harmon made his way to the mule where Rodriguez and Chen were reviewing performance data from the demonstration. Outstanding work, he told them. The mule performed exactly as predicted. Chen smiled tiredly. Better, actually. We were conservative in our performance estimates to ensure we didn't overpromise. What happens now, sir? Rodriguez asked. Harmon gazed across the test range where the Abrams was returning to its maintenance area. Now we build a real prototype, one that incorporates everything we've learned about balanced design principles, one that can't be dismissed as merely a mobility demonstrator. With Bennett's support, we might actually get the resources to do it properly, Chen observed. Harmon nodded, though his expression remained cautious. Lewis won't surrender easily, and he still controls the official program of record. He turned to face his team, who had gathered around the mule in triumphant exhaustion. We've won a battle today, but the war continues. The Pentagon will resist change because change threatens established programs, budgets, and careers. Our job is to make the case so compelling that they have no choice but to listen. As the team celebrated their victory, Harmon stood slightly apart, his gaze distant. He was remembering another time, another place. Korea, 1950. The bitter cold and the shock of discovering that American tanks were evenly matched against their Soviet counterparts, despite years of technological development. History didn't repeat, but it did rhyme. Once again, America faced adversaries who understood fundamental principles that the Pentagon had forgotten. Once again, institutional resistance threatened to perpetuate flawed approaches despite clear evidence of better alternatives. But this time might be different. This time, they had demonstrated the advantages so clearly that even the most entrenched bureaucracy would struggle to ignore them. Project Thunder had survived its most significant challenge. Now the real work would begin. Building not just a prototype, but a new vision for American armored warfare. One that returned to the fundamental principles that had proven effective throughout history. Balance, efficiency, sustainability. The qualities that mattered most when tanks faced each other in actual combat. The qualities that determined which crews returned home and which did not. For James Harmon, that had always been the only metric that truly mattered. Dawn broke over Fort Knox with a crimson intensity that seemed fitting for the challenges that lay ahead. Colonel James Harmon stood at the window of his quarters, watching the sun illuminate the distant silhouettes of tanks on the training ground. 6 weeks had passed since the dramatic mobility demonstration that had saved Project Thunder from termination. 6 weeks of intense work, political maneuvering, and preparation for what would likely be the final battle in Harmon's long campaign to change how America built its tanks. The prototype that had emerged from their efforts bore little resemblance to the skeletal mule that had outperformed the Abrams in their impromptu competition. This was a fully realized vision of what American armored warfare could become if freed from the constraints of conventional thinking. The team had named it Phoenix, an acknowledgement that it had risen from the ashes of sabotage and institutional resistance. A knock at his door interrupted Harmon's thoughts. Enter. Captain Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, his expression reflecting both excitement and apprehension. Sir, final preparations are complete. Phoenix is ready for the Secretary's demonstration. Harmon nodded. Weather conditions? Perfect, sir. Clear skies, good visibility. All testing stations report operational readiness. And our opposition? Rodriguez's expression tightened slightly. General Lewis arrived last night with a full Pentagon delegation. The modified XM-1A prototype was delivered by transport aircraft at 0400 hours. Their technical team is conducting final checks now. And our guest of honor? The Secretary of Defense is scheduled to arrive at 0900 hours. Full security protocols are in place. Harmon checked his watch. Just over 2 hours remained before the most important demonstration of his career. A demonstration that would determine whether American tank design continued down the path of increasing weight and complexity or returned to the balanced approach that had proven so effective throughout history. Very well, Captain. I'll join the team at the staging area in 30 minutes. After Rodriguez departed, Harmon removed a small wooden box from his desk drawer. Inside lay his Silver Star from Korea, awarded for actions against North Korean T-34s during the desperate fighting around Chosin Reservoir. He had never been one to display his decorations, considering them reminders of loss rather than symbols of glory. But today, he pinned the medal to his uniform for the first time in decades. Some battles transcended personal accolades. Some principles were worth fighting for, regardless of the cost to one's career or reputation. Today would determine whether his 70-year campaign would end in victory or defeat. Either way, Harmon intended to face the outcome wearing the medal he had earned facing Soviet tanks in the frozen hills of Korea. The Phoenix prototype waited in the massive maintenance bay, its lines reflecting a radical departure from conventional American tank design. Lower, more angular, its silhouette bore a distinct resemblance to the T-34 that had inspired many of its design principles, yet incorporated thoroughly modern technology. Dr. Chen supervised final diagnostic checks, her tablet displaying a continuous stream of performance data. Despite having slept only a few hours in the past several days, her movements remained precise and focused. "Status report," Harmon requested as he approached. Chen looked up, her expression brightening slightly at the sight of the silver star on his uniform. "All systems nominal, Colonel. Power plant is performing within optimal parameters. Fire control systems calibrated and verified. Active protection suite fully operational. Ammunition. Training rounds loaded as specified for the demonstration. Live ammunition secured in the ready rack as a contingency per General Parker's authorization." Harmon raised an eyebrow at this last detail. "Contingency?" Chen glanced around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. General Parker was concerned about potential interference. "The live rounds are a precaution only, of course." Harmon nodded, understanding the unspoken implication. After the sabotage attempts against the Mule, they were taking no chances with Phoenix. Williams approached, tablet in hand displaying the day's schedule. "Colonel, we've received the final parameters for the demonstration from the Secretary's office. 3 phases, as we expected: mobility, firepower, and combined arms integration." "And the XM-1A variant will be competing against?" Williams's expression turned grim. "They've made modifications, reduced weight by approximately 8 tons by removing certain systems. Clearly an attempt to address the mobility issues we demonstrated with the Mule." "So they've already begun incorporating our concepts," Harmon observed with a hint of satisfaction. "To a limited extent," Williams confirmed. "But they're still fundamentally committed to their original design philosophy. The weight reduction is cosmetic rather than systemic." Kaufman joined them, having been reviewing historical documentation to provide context for the Secretary's briefing. "Classic institutional response," the historian noted. "Make minimal adjustments to address specific criticisms while maintaining the overall approach." The Germans did the same thing with their Tiger tank when confronted with evidence of its tactical limitations. "How did that work out for them?" Harmon asked dryly. "Not well," Kaufman replied with equal dryness. "They lost the war." The maintenance bay doors opened to admit General Parker, accompanied by Richard Bennett from the Inspector General's office. Bennett had become an unexpected ally since witnessing the Mule's performance and uncovering evidence of sabotage. His preliminary report to the Secretary had secured the additional funding and authorization that had made Phoenix possible. "Impressive," Bennett remarked, studying the prototype. "Quite different from what I imagined based on your theoretical models." "Theory refined by practical experience," Harmon replied. "Phoenix incorporates every principle we advocated while maintaining compatibility with existing logistics and training frameworks." Parker checked his watch. "The Secretary will be arriving soon. His advance team is already setting up at the demonstration area." He turned to Harmon. "This is it, Jim. Everything we've worked for comes down to today's demonstration." "Has there been any further interference from Lewis or his allies?" Harmon asked quietly. "Nothing overt," Parker replied. "But I've doubled security on all access points and implemented continuous surveillance of the prototype. If they try anything, we'll know." Bennett's expression remained carefully neutral, but his next words revealed his continued support. "The Secretary is approaching this with an open mind. My report emphasized the potential strategic advantages of your design philosophy, particularly in light of emerging Chinese and Russian developments. And Lewis remains firmly committed to the XM-1A program. He's brought his full technical team and several senior Pentagon officials to support his position." Harmon nodded, having expected nothing less. "Then we let Phoenix speak for itself." The demonstration area had been prepared with meticulous attention to detail. a comprehensive testing ground that would evaluate every aspect of tank performance under controlled conditions. Mobility courses, firing ranges, simulated urban environments, each designed to showcase the different philosophies embodied by the two competing prototypes. Viewing stands had been erected for the official delegation, providing clear sight lines to all testing areas. Technical monitoring stations surrounded the perimeter, staffed by independent evaluation teams that would measure and record every aspect of performance. The Secretary of Defense arrived precisely at 0900 hours, accompanied by a small entourage of senior military and civilian officials. A career public servant with a reputation for pragmatism and analytical thinking, Secretary Harrison Wells had risen above partisan politics to become a respected voice on national security matters. His presence underscored the importance of today's demonstration. General Lewis greeted the secretary warmly, clearly intending to establish his narrative before Harmon's team could present their case. The two men spoke quietly for several minutes as the rest of the delegation took their places in the viewing stand. Parker nudged Harmon. "We need to break up that conversation before Lewis poisons the well." Harmon nodded and approached the secretary, extending his hand. "Mr. Secretary, Colonel James Harmon, thank you for taking the time to evaluate our work personally." Wells turned, his analytical gaze taking in Harmon's appearance, including the Silver Star. "Colonel Harmon, your project has generated quite a bit of controversy within the Pentagon. General Lewis was just expressing his concerns about the resources diverted from the official program of record. Resources that have produced tangible innovations in just a fraction of the time and cost of the XM-1A program," Harmon replied evenly. Lewis bristled. "Innovations that remain unproven in any meaningful combat scenario. The XM-1A has undergone extensive virtual testing against projected threat models." "So has Phoenix," Harmon countered, "along with actual mobility testing that demonstrated significant advantages over current platforms." The secretary raised a hand to forestall further argument. "Gentlemen, that's precisely why I'm here today. To evaluate both approaches objectively and determine the best path forward for our armored forces." He gestured toward the demonstration area. "Shall we proceed?" As the delegation took their places, the two prototypes were moved into position at the starting point of the mobility course. The contrast between them was immediately apparent. The XM-1A represented the culmination of traditional American tank design philosophy. Massive, heavily armored, bristling with advanced systems and weaponry. Even with the recent weight reductions, it projected an image of overwhelming power and protection. Phoenix presented a different vision entirely. Lower in profile, more angular, its design emphasized balanced performance rather than maximum protection. To the untrained eye, it might have appeared less imposing than its competitor, but Harmon knew that appearances in tank design were often deceiving. The secretary studied both vehicles with evident interest. "Quite different approaches," he observed. "Colonel Harmon, would you care to explain the philosophy behind your design before we begin the demonstration?" Harmon stepped forward, aware that this was his opportunity to frame the evaluation before it began. "Mr. Secretary, Phoenix represents a return to fundamental principles that have proven effective throughout the history of armored warfare. Balance between protection, mobility, and firepower. Optimization for actual combat conditions rather than theoretical maximum performance. Sustainability in prolonged operations." He gestured toward this prototype. "Every aspect of Phoenix's design reflects these principles. Its weight distribution allows for superior mobility without sacrificing essential protection. Its power plant delivers exceptional range and reduced logistical requirements. Its simplified maintenance architecture enables field repairs without specialized equipment." Lewis interjected. "What the colonel fails to mention is the reduced protection compared to the XM-1A. Our design prioritizes crew survivability above all else." "A valid concern," Harmon acknowledged. "But protection isn't merely a function of armor thickness. True protection comes from a combination of factors including mobility, reduced target profile, and active defensive systems. Phoenix incorporates all three while maintaining armor protection against the most common battlefield threats." The secretary nodded thoughtfully. "Let's see these principles demonstrated in action. Begin with the mobility evaluation." The first phase of the demonstration proceeded similarly to the earlier competition between the Mule and the Abrams. Both prototypes navigated a challenging course designed to test acceleration, maneuverability, obstacle crossing capability, and sustained mobility. Despite the XM-1A's weight reductions, Phoenix demonstrated clear advantages in every category. Its balanced design allowed for sharper turns, faster acceleration, and superior performance across difficult terrain. When faced with a mud pit that simulated Eastern European battlefield conditions, the difference became even more pronounced. Phoenix crossed with minimal difficulty while the XM-1A struggled, its greater weight causing it to sink deeper into the soft ground. 27% overall mobility advantage, reported the chief evaluator as the first phase concluded. Phoenix completed the course in 14 minutes, 18 seconds. XM-1A completed in 18 minutes, 42 seconds. Lewis appeared uncomfortable but maintained his composure. Mobility is just one factor in overall combat effectiveness, Mr. Secretary. The second phase will demonstrate the superior firepower of the XM-1A system. The firepower demonstration took place on a specialized range equipped with target arrays at varying distances. Both tanks would engage identical sets of targets with performance measured by accuracy, time to engagement, and effectiveness. To everyone's surprise, Phoenix performed equally well in this phase. Its fire control system, while technically less advanced than the XM-1A's, demonstrated comparable accuracy and significantly faster target acquisition. When the results were announced, showing a statistical tie in overall firepower effectiveness, Lewis could barely contain his displeasure. "Impossible," he muttered. "Their fire control system is significantly less sophisticated than ours." Sophistication doesn't always equate to effectiveness, Harmon noted. Phoenix's system was designed for reliability and speed rather than maximum theoretical performance. The secretary had been watching closely, occasionally making notes on a small pad. "Interesting results," he observed. "But the real test comes in the combined arms phase. Individual capabilities matter less than how they function together in simulated combat conditions. The final phase would be the most comprehensive. Both tanks would navigate a complex course that simulated an actual battlefield environment, engaging multiple target types while overcoming various obstacles and challenges. Performance would be measured not just in target hits, but in overall tactical effectiveness, including fuel consumption, time to objective, and simulated survivability." As the prototypes moved to their starting positions, Harmon noticed Rodriguez checking a secure communication device. "Problem, Captain." Rodriguez's expression was concerned. "Security team reports unusual activity near the ammunition storage area. They're investigating now." "Keep me informed," Harmon instructed. "We can't afford any disruptions at this stage." The combined arms demonstration began with both prototypes advancing through simulated enemy territory. They engaged targets representing hostile vehicles and infantry, maneuvering continuously to utilize available cover and concealment. Phoenix immediately demonstrated its advantages, moving rapidly between firing positions while maintaining accurate fire on designated targets. The XM-1A followed a more conventional approach, relying on its superior armor to absorb potential return fire while engaging targets methodically. Halfway through the course, Rodriguez approached Harmon urgently. "Sir, security confirms tampering with our reserve ammunition. Several training rounds have been modified with what appears to be tracking devices." "Lewis?" Harmon asked quietly. "Unknown, but the modifications would allow someone to monitor Phoenix's exact movements during the demonstration." Harmon considered this information. "Are our currently loaded rounds secure?" "Yes, sir. We verified them personally before loading." "Then we proceed as planned, but increase security around all support vehicles and equipment. If they're willing to tamper with ammunition, they might attempt other forms of sabotage." The demonstration continued, with Phoenix maintaining its performance advantage through increasingly complex scenarios. As they approached the final phase of the evaluation, a simulated urban environment, the difference between the two design philosophies became even more apparent. Phoenix navigated the confined spaces with remarkable agility, its lower profile allowing it to utilize cover that the taller XM-1A could not. When engaging targets between buildings, Phoenix demonstrated superior maneuverability, executing rapid position changes that its heavier competitor simply couldn't match. The secretary watched with evident interest, occasionally conferring with his technical advisors. Even from a distance, his engagement was obvious. As the demonstration neared its conclusion, Rodriguez received another security alert. "Sir, unknown vehicle approaching from the northwest access road, not responding to security challenges." Harmon's expression darkened, alert-based security, and informed General Parker immediately. Before Rodriguez could relay these instructions, a loud explosion echoed from the direction of the maintenance facility where Phoenix had been prepared. Smoke billowed into the sky as alarms began sounding across the base. "What the hell was that?" the secretary demanded, rising from his seat. Lewis appeared genuinely surprised. "Some kind of explosion at the maintenance bay, Mr. Secretary. We should evacuate immediately as a security precaution." Harmon's eyes narrowed. The timing was too convenient. With the demonstration nearly complete and Phoenix clearly outperforming the XM-1A, someone had created a diversion. "Mr. Secretary, I recommend we complete the demonstration. Base security will handle the incident." Lewis objected immediately. "Protocol requires evacuation of VIPs during any security incident, Colonel. The Secretary's safety is paramount." Before the Secretary could respond, Bennett intervened. "Actually, General Lewis, security protocols give the base commander discretion based on the nature of the threat. Since the incident appears localized and distant from our current position, an immediate evacuation isn't mandatory." The Secretary studied both men before making his decision. "We'll continue for now, but I want regular updates on the situation." The demonstration resumed, though the tension had increased noticeably. Phoenix completed the final segment of the course, demonstrating remarkable performance throughout. When the final results were compiled, the outcome was unambiguous. "Overall performance assessment," announced the chief evaluator. "Phoenix demonstrates superior mobility by 24%, equivalent firepower effectiveness, and improved tactical flexibility in all tested scenarios. Fuel consumption reduced by 38% compared to XM-1A. Maintenance requirements projected at 60% of XM-1A based on systems complexity analysis." The Secretary reviewed the results with a thoughtful expression. "Impressive performance, Colonel Harmon. Your team has clearly demonstrated the advantages of your approach." Lewis attempted one final objection. "Mr. Secretary, these controlled demonstrations cannot replicate actual combat conditions. The XM-1A's superior protection would prove decisive in a real engagement where enemy fire is incoming." "An interesting theory," Harmon countered, "but historical analysis doesn't support it. Mobility and first strike capability have consistently proven more determinative of survival than maximum armor protection." The Secretary raised a hand. "I believe I've seen enough to make an informed assessment. Let's continue this discussion back at headquarters after security has resolved the current incident." As the delegation prepared to depart, Parker approached with a security officer. "The explosion was a diversionary tactic," he reported quietly. "Someone detonated a non-lethal device near the maintenance bay. Meanwhile, an unauthorized vehicle attempted to access the restricted testing data collection point. Security apprehended the driver, who carried credentials from Defense Systems Integration Corporation." "Lewis's contractor," Harmon noted grimly. Parker nodded. "The same firm that employed our previous saboteur. This is becoming a pattern that's difficult to dismiss as coincidence." The Secretary had overheard their conversation. "Are you suggesting that someone deliberately attempted to disrupt this demonstration, General Parker?" "The evidence points in that direction, Mr. Secretary. We've experienced several incidents of sabotage against Project Thunder, all linked to individuals associated with General Lewis's primary contractors." Lewis, who had joined them, turned red with anger. "That's an outrageous accusation. I categorically deny any involvement in such activities." "No one has accused you directly, General," Bennett observed mildly. "But the pattern of interference with Colonel Harmon's project warrants investigation, particularly given the clear advantages his approach has demonstrated today." The Secretary's expression had turned serious. "I want a full security investigation into these incidents, Mr. Bennett. If anyone has attempted to sabotage an official Defense Department research project, I want them identified and held accountable." "Of course, Mr. Secretary." As the delegation departed, Harmon remained behind with his core team. Despite the attempted sabotage, a sense of cautious optimism prevailed. Phoenix had performed exactly as designed, demonstrating clear advantages over its competitor in nearly every category. "Do you think we've convinced him?" Chen asked, watching the Secretary's helicopter lift off. "We've given him compelling evidence," Harmon replied. "But the XM-1A program represents billions in contracts and years of institutional investment. Those aren't easy factors to overcome, regardless of performance advantages." Rodriguez approached from the Phoenix prototype, having completed the post-demonstration systems check. "All systems performed within expected parameters, sir. No anomalies or unexpected issues despite the extended operation." Harmon nodded with satisfaction. Excellent work, Captain. And the security situation? Under control. Base security has detained the suspect for questioning. Preliminary investigation suggests he was attempting to access our performance data, possibly to manipulate the results before they were presented to the Secretary. Williams joined them, having overseen the data collection process. All performance metrics have been secured and verified by independent evaluators. The results are unambiguous and cannot be credibly challenged. Harmon surveyed his team with pride. Then we've done everything possible to make our case. The decision now rests with the Secretary. 3 days later, Harmon sat in General Parker's office, waiting for the video conference with the Pentagon to begin. The Secretary had returned to Washington immediately after the demonstration, promising a decision within the week. Now that decision was about to be announced. The core Project Thunder team had assembled, their expressions reflecting a mixture of hope and apprehension. Chen sat rigidly in her chair, tablet in hand containing their final performance data. Williams maintained a professional military bearing despite the tension. Kaufman appeared the most relaxed, perhaps because his historian's perspective gave him a longer view of events. Rodriguez stood near the door, still technically serving as Harmon's aide despite having become an integral part of the project team. Parker paced near the video screen, occasionally checking his watch. "They're 2 minutes late," he noted with mild irritation. "The Pentagon is never in a hurry to deliver news that disrupts the status quo," Harmon observed dryly. The screen activated, showing the Secretary seated at a conference table flanked by several senior officials. Notably absent was General Lewis. "General Parker, Colonel Harmon," the Secretary began, "thank you for your patience. I've completed my review of Project Thunder's demonstration results and consulted with the Joint Chiefs regarding our path forward for next-generation armored vehicle development." He paused, shuffling some papers before continuing. "The performance advantages demonstrated by your Phoenix prototype are undeniable, particularly in terms of mobility, operational range, and logistical sustainability. These factors will be increasingly critical in potential future conflict scenarios across the Pacific Theater and Eastern Europe." Harmon felt a surge of cautious optimism, though he maintained his neutral expression. "However," the Secretary continued, "the significant investment already made in the XM-1A program cannot be simply abandoned. 3 years of development and billions in research represent a substantial commitment of defense resources." The team exchanged concerned glances. This sounded like a diplomatic rejection wrapped in bureaucratic justification. But the Secretary wasn't finished. "Therefore, I am directing a fundamental restructuring of our next-generation armored vehicle development. Project Thunder will be elevated to program of record status, with Colonel Harmon appointed as co-director alongside a to-be-determined replacement for General Lewis, who has submitted his resignation effective immediately." Parker couldn't contain a surprised smile. Harmon remained carefully neutral, though his eyes reflected satisfaction. "The XM-1A design will be comprehensively re-evaluated to incorporate the balanced design principles demonstrated by Phoenix. Specifically, weight reduction, improved power-to-weight ratio, and simplified maintenance architecture will be prioritized in all future development." The Secretary shuffled his papers again before delivering the final portion of his decision. "Furthermore, I am authorizing accelerated development of a production-ready prototype based on the Phoenix design as a contingency platform. Should the modified XM-1A program fail to achieve specified performance targets within 18 months, the Phoenix-derived design will become our primary next-generation tank program." He looked directly at Harmon. "Colonel, your persistence in advocating for fundamental principles over technological complexity has been vindicated by the demonstration results. Sometimes the Pentagon needs to be reminded that effectiveness in combat conditions matters more than impressive specifications on paper." After the video conference concluded, the team sat in stunned silence for several moments. "We did it," Chen said finally, her usual professional reserve cracking to reveal genuine emotion. "They're actually going to build it." "Not quite," Harmon cautioned. "We've won the right to continue development while the XM-1A undergoes modification. The final decision hasn't been made. But they're implementing our core principles," Williams pointed out. "Even if they ultimately proceed with a modified XM-1A, it will incorporate the balanced approach we've advocated. That's a significant victory in itself." Parker clapped Harmon on the shoulder. "It's more than anyone expected, Jim. After 70 years, the Army is finally listening to what you've been saying since Korea." Kaufman nodded thoughtfully. "History vindicates those who remain true to fundamental principles. The T-34's design philosophy has proven its value once again, 2 generations later. Rodriguez had remained quiet, but now he spoke up. Sir, there's something else you should know. Bennett called earlier. The investigation into the sabotage attempts has uncovered evidence linking them directly to Defense Systems Integration Corporation. Several executives have been detained for questioning. And Lewis's resignation, Harmon asked. Apparently suggested by the secretary as an alternative to a formal investigation into his relationships with defense contractors, Rodriguez replied. Not an admission of guilt, but certainly suspicious timing. Harmon nodded, unsurprised. The institutional resistance they had faced had always been about more than competing design philosophies. Billions in contracts created powerful incentives to maintain the status quo, regardless of performance limitations. What happens now, sir? Chen asked. Now we build a tank that will save American lives in future conflicts, Harmon replied simply. A tank that balances protection with mobility and sustainability. A tank that learns from history rather than ignoring it. He stood, suddenly feeling the weight of his years despite their victory. The real work begins now. We need to translate our prototype into a production-ready design that can be manufactured efficiently and maintained in the field. The team dispersed to begin this new phase of their mission, energized by the secretary's decision. Harmon remained behind with Parker, the two old friends contemplating what they had achieved. You should feel vindicated, Parker observed. After all these years, the principles you've advocated have finally been recognized. Harmon's expression remained thoughtful. Partial vindication. The institutional inertia remains powerful. They've given us an opportunity, not a guarantee. Always the skeptic, Parker chided gently. Enjoy the victory, Jim. They don't come often in battles against entrenched bureaucracy. I'll enjoy it when American tankers take Phoenix or its descendants into battle and come home safely because we got the fundamentals right. Harmon's gaze drifted to the window, where the distant silhouette of Phoenix could be seen on the test range. Until then, there's work to be done. 6 months later, Harmon stood in a different maintenance bay, this one at the Army's Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. Before him sat the production prototype of Phoenix, now officially designated XM2A1. The design had evolved during the development process, incorporating refinements suggested by extensive testing and evaluation. But the fundamental principles remained unchanged. Balance, efficiency, sustainability, the qualities that determined actual combat effectiveness rather than impressive statistics on paper. Secretary Wells entered the bay, accompanied by a small entourage of senior officials. He had become an unexpected champion of the Phoenix program, regularly visiting to monitor progress and provide political support against continuing resistance from certain quarters of the Pentagon and defense industry. Colonel Harmon, he greeted, extending his hand. Your team continues to exceed expectations. The latest performance data is remarkable. Harmon shook the offered hand. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We're particularly pleased with the production feasibility assessment. XM2A1 can be manufactured at approximately 70% of the projected cost of the XM1A, with 30% fewer man-hours per unit. The Secretary nodded appreciatively. The simplified maintenance architecture has also impressed our logistics planners. Field maintenance requirements reduced by over 40% compared to current platforms. He gestured toward the prototype. I understand you've implemented some design changes since I last visited. Refinements rather than fundamental changes, Harmon clarified. We've optimized the armor distribution based on further threat analysis, improved the power plant efficiency by 7%, enhanced the fire control system integration. Chen approached, having overheard their conversation. We've maintained our focus on balanced performance, Mr. Secretary. Each modification is evaluated against its impact on the overall system rather than optimizing any single characteristic. Unlike our competition, the Secretary observed with a slight smile, the modified XM1A program continued in parallel with Phoenix development, though with diminishing momentum. Despite incorporating some of Phoenix's design principles, the fundamental architecture remained wedded to the more is better philosophy that Harmon had critiqued from the beginning. Each iteration added weight and complexity, even as they attempted to address mobility limitations. The latest XM1A variant has grown to 92 tons, the Secretary noted. Their engineers keep adding systems to address identified shortcomings rather than reconsidering the basic approach. A predictable outcome, Harmon replied. They're trying to incorporate our principles without abandoning their fundamental philosophy. The result is an increasingly compromised design. The Secretary studied the Phoenix prototype with evident satisfaction. Your approach has been vindicated by results, Colonel. The 18-month evaluation period I established is only half complete, but the performance differential is already clear. I'll be recommending to the Joint Chiefs that Phoenix be designated our primary next-generation tank platform, effective immediately. For Harmon, this represented the culmination of a lifetime's advocacy. From his first encounter with T-34s in Korea to this moment, he had maintained that fundamental principles mattered more than technological sophistication in tank design. Balance over specialization, practical effectiveness over theoretical performance, sustainability over maximum protection. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, he said simply. This platform will save American lives in future conflicts. That's the only metric that truly matters. As the secretary continued his tour of the facility, Rodriguez joined Harmon beside the prototype. Congratulations, sir. You've changed the future of American armored warfare. Harmon shook his head slightly. We've changed it, Captain. This was never a one-man crusade. It required a team willing to challenge conventional wisdom and persevere against institutional resistance. Rodriguez studied the older man with respect. Will you stay on to oversee production implementation? The transition from prototype to manufacturing will be challenging. No. Harmon's response was immediate and definitive. I've accomplished what I set out to do. The principles are established. The path forward is clear. Implementation requires younger minds not wedded to old ways of thinking. He turned to face Rodriguez directly. In fact, I've recommended you as Deputy Program Manager for the production phase. Chen will lead technical implementation. Williams will oversee tactical integration. Together, Together, you represent the future of this program. Rodriguez appeared surprised but pleased. Thank you for your confidence, sir. We'll ensure Phoenix lives up to its potential. I know you will. Harmon rested a hand on the prototype's hull. Just remember what this was all about from the beginning. Not technology for its own sake, not impressive specifications on paper, but a balanced design that gives American soldiers the best possible chance of accomplishing their mission and returning home safely. Later that evening, Harmon stood alone at the edge of the test range, watching the sunset over the distant horizon. In his hand, he held the Silver Star from Korea, its weight familiar after all these decades. His mind drifted back to that frozen hillside near Chosin Reservoir. The shock of discovering that American tanks were barely a match for their Soviet counterparts despite years of technological development. The desperate improvisation required to overcome limitations that should never have existed. Now, 70 years later, he had finally ensured that future generations of American tank crews would not face the same disadvantages. Phoenix represented more than just a new tank design. It embodied a philosophy that prioritized actual combat effectiveness over theoretical performance metrics. A philosophy that understood the fundamental principles of armored warfare remained constant even as technology evolved. A voice interrupted his reverie. Beautiful evening, isn't it? Harmon turned to find Kaufman approaching, his historian's curiosity apparently extending to human subjects as well. I thought you'd be celebrating with the others, Kaufman continued, gesturing toward the officers' club where the Phoenix team had gathered to mark the secretary's announcement. I've never been much for celebrations, Harmon replied. Besides, this was never about personal vindication. Kaufman nodded understanding. It was about ensuring the lessons of history weren't forgotten, about honoring the sacrifices of those who paid the price for institutional blindness. Something like that. Harmon looked down at the silver star in his palm. This was awarded for actions against North Korean T-34s in 1950. The citation mentions destruction of enemy armor against overwhelming odds. What it doesn't mention is how close we came to disaster because our tanks were barely adequate to the task. And now Phoenix ensures that won't happen again. Kaufman studied the older man with professional interest. You know, I've been researching the historical context of tank development for a book I'm writing. The pattern is remarkably consistent. Institutional momentum almost always favors complexity and specialization over balanced design. It took someone with your particular background and persistence to break that pattern. Harmon shook his head slightly. I just had the advantage of perspective. I'd seen firsthand what happens when theory meets reality on the battlefield. Most of the Pentagon planners had only experienced war through simulations and reports. Nevertheless, your impact on American armored warfare will be felt for generations. Kaufman gestured toward the distant prototype. Phoenix represents a fundamental shift in design philosophy that will influence military technology well beyond tanks. Perhaps, Harmon pocketed the Silver Star. Or perhaps we'll forget these lessons again when the next technological revolution promises capabilities too tempting to resist. That's why we record history, Colonel, to remind future generations of the lessons paid for in blood and sacrifice. As darkness fell over Aberdeen Proving Ground, Harmon took one last look at the silhouette of Phoenix against the fading light. Whatever the future held, he had fulfilled the promise made to himself in the frozen hills of Korea. He had ensured that American tanks would prioritize the qualities that mattered most in actual combat. Balance, efficiency, sustainability, the foundations of effective armored warfare since the first tanks rolled across the battlefields of World War I. Some principles transcended time and technology. Some lessons, once learned, should never be forgotten. For Colonel James Iron Jim Harmon, that understanding had defined a lifetime of service, and now embodied in the Phoenix prototype, it would protect American soldiers in conflicts yet to come. The wheel of history had turned full circle. The lessons of the legendary T-34, learned painfully in combat 7 decades earlier, would now guide American tank design into the future. That legacy, more than any personal accolade, represented the true victory.